Leora Vane had exactly 4 hours to become sick. Not the kind of sick that made people feel sorry for you. The kind that made people leave you alone. She sat on the edge of her bed in the gray light of early morning, turning the small clay cup between her fingers, watching the liquid inside catch the last of the candle flame. It was dark green and smelled like river mud and something faintly bitter, like the rind of an unripe fruit left too long in the sun. She had made it herself, in the kitchen, after midnight, when the house was finally quiet, and no one would ask questions she was not ready to answer. She drank it in one go. It tasted exactly as terrible as she knew it would. Leora set the cup down on her bedside table, lay back on the pillow, crossed her arms over her chest, and waited. Outside, the kingdom was already moving. She could hear it through the walls of the estate, cartwheels on stone roads, voices calling across courtyards, the low sound of drums that had been beaten since dawn to announce the day. Selection Day. The day that happened once every 10 years, when every unmated female between the ages of 18 and 25 was required to present herself before the Alpha King so that he could walk among them and find his fated one. No one skipped it. That was not a law anyone had written down. It was simply a thing that did not happen, the way that sunrise did not happen in reverse, the way that rivers did not flow uphill. You were called, you went. You stood in a line in your best white dress, and you waited to be looked at, and possibly chosen. And if you were not chosen, you went home, and you told yourself that was fine, that you had never wanted it anyway, and sometimes you even believed it. Leora had believed it, once. She was 22 now. She had already stood in one selection, the one 4 years ago, the minor pack selection that her father had insisted on when she turned 18, the smaller ceremony, where the local pack lord's son was supposed to find his mate among the girls of the territory. She had worn a pale yellow dress because white made her look like she was trying too hard. She had stood straight. She had smiled when she was supposed to smile. And she had watched Aldrich Vane, her own cousin by marriage, walk straight past her, slow his steps when he reached her sister Marin, and not walk any further. The bond had announced itself in the way bonds always did, a visible shift in the air between two people, a stillness that the whole room noticed. Everyone had seen it. Marin had gone pink with surprise, and something that looked, in the moment, like genuine joy. Aldrich had taken her hand. Leora had kept smiling. She had kept smiling for the entire ceremony, and the celebration dinner that followed, and the weeks of preparation for the formal mating that came after. She had been a very good sister, and a very good cousin by marriage, and a very good daughter, who said all the right things, and helped Marin choose flowers, and never once said out loud that she had walked into that selection believing, with the particular foolishness of an 18-year-old, that something good might happen. 4 years later, she was lying in bed, waiting for a tincture of marsh root and river moss to make her hands shake, and her forehead sweat, and her eyes go red-rimmed, because she had decided that she would rather look feverish than walk into another room and be invisible again. The marsh root worked faster than she expected. Within the hour her skin was damp, and her hands had taken on a visible tremor, and when she caught her own reflection in the small mirror above her washstand, she did not look well at all. She looked, in fact, like someone who had been fighting something internal for several days, and had recently begun to lose. She pulled her blanket up, she let her hair go loose, she pinched the inside of her wrist, until her eyes watered slightly. Then she waited for her mother to find her. Leora Vane knocked at 7:30, already dressed in the gray formal coat she wore to every ceremony of significance, her hair pinned into the precise knot that she maintained through every difficulty the family had ever faced. She opened the door and stopped. "Leora," she said it, the way mothers say a name when they are rapidly revising a plan. "I do not feel well." Leora said this to the ceiling, because she could not quite make herself say it directly to her mother's face. Alara crossed the room. She pressed the back of her fingers to Leora's forehead, which was indeed damp and slightly warm from the marsh root working through her blood. She made the small sound mothers make when a body is confirming what a face has already told them. "You have a fever." "I think so." "Today," her mother said it, not as a question, but as a statement. She was testing for weight, checking how much of her morning it was going to cost her. "I know what day it is." Leora closed her eyes. "I am sorry." Leora Vane was quiet for a moment. She was not a woman who showed her feelings in large, obvious ways. She showed them in the set of her jaw, and the particular stillness that came over her hands when she was deciding something. The stillness came now. "I will send for the healer," she said. "You do not need to do that." "I will send for the healer," her mother repeated, which meant the discussion was finished. Old Bren, the pack healer who had lived in a cottage at the edge of the estate grounds for as long as Leora could remember, arrived within the half-hour. He was a small man with a broad face and hands that always smelled of dried herbs. He looked at Leora the way he had looked at her every time she had been genuinely unwell as a child, which was with the focused attention of someone who considered illness a personal inconvenience, directed specifically at him. He checked her pulse. He looked at her tongue. He pressed his fingers gently along her jaw and her throat, and then held the backs of his hands near her cheeks without touching them. "Sweating sickness," he said finally. "Early stage. She should not be outdoors." Ilara absorbed this. Her father, Doran Vane, who had been standing in the doorway because he was too formal a man to sit on the edge of a daughter's sickbed, cleared his throat. "The selection requires all eligible women of the pack," he said. He did not say it unkindly. He said it the way he said most things, as a fact that existed independently of anyone's feelings about it. "My eligible woman," old Bren said pleasantly, "currently has a body temperature high enough that walking to the Great Hall and standing for 2 hours could push her into a serious fever by evening." He looked at Doran over the tops of his spectacles. "You are welcome to send her if you choose, Lord Vane. I would simply recommend that you have a cart standing by to bring her home when she collapses." Doran said nothing. Bren left a small packet of dried herbs for a tea that Leora was fairly sure would actually help the genuine dizziness the marsh root was causing as a side effect, which she had not planned for but which was now doing excellent work on her behalf. The door closed. Leora lay in her bed and listened to the house move around her, her father and mother's muffled voices in the corridor, then the sound of preparation continuing without her, dresses being pressed and shoes being found, and younger cousins being herded toward the courtyard. She heard her sister Marin's voice at some point, bright and carrying, asking whether Leora would be all right, and her mother's quieter response. She felt something she did not want to identify. She turned her face toward the wall. The problem was not that she didn't understand what the selection was. She understood perfectly. The Alpha King's fated bond was not like ordinary bonds. It did not work by proximity or familiarity or attraction in the usual sense. It worked by scent and the pull of something old and woven that lived in the blood of the royal line. A king could walk among 100 women and feel nothing, and then walk past the 101st and feel everything at once, and that was that. It was not chosen. It was not earned. It simply happened or it did not, which meant that a girl could stand in a selection and be looked at and passed over, and it would have nothing to do with whether she was beautiful or kind or interesting or worth knowing. It would simply mean she was not the one. Leora knew this. She had told herself this, calmly and rationally, for 4 years. It did not help. Because the knowledge that rejection was not personal did not actually make it feel less personal, in the way that knowing a rainstorm is not directed at you does not make you any less wet. You still stood in the line. You were still looked at. You were still passed. And the person watching from somewhere in the room who loved you and wanted good things for you still had to watch it happen, with a pleasant expression arranged across their face. She was done standing in lines. She pulled the blanket up further and closed her eyes, and decided that whatever happened today, she had made the right choice. She believed that for approximately 40 minutes. Then the drums outside changed rhythm. It was a subtle shift, a slower beat layered under the faster one, the sound that meant the royal party had entered the territory. Leora had heard it only once before, 8 years ago when she was 14, when the Alpha King had passed through their region on a tour of the Western Packs. She had not been old enough to be in a selection then, so she had watched from a window, and even from that distance the arrival had been something that settled into your bones rather than your ears. The drums were doing that now. She told herself she was not curious. She was a little curious. She rose from the bed, wrapped herself in the blanket, and crossed to her window. Her room faced the back gardens rather than the main road, so she could not see anything directly. But she could hear the gates opening, the sounds of the stable yard filling with horses and riders, and she could see, through a gap between 2 outbuildings, a small slice of the estate's main courtyard. She saw horses first. Big, dark, well-kept animals that moved with the contained confidence of horses who were used to being taken seriously. Then riders in gray and silver, the king's house colors, dismounting, in the practiced silence of people who had done this at enough estates that they had a system. And then she saw him. He was not what the gossip had described. She had heard stories, the way everyone in the kingdom had heard stories, that the Alpha King was a large man, which turned out to be accurate, though large felt too simple a word for something that registered more as solidity than size. He moved across the courtyard without hurrying, and the people around him adjusted their movement to accommodate his, without seeming to notice they were doing it. He wore gray, simply cut, without the decoration she had expected. He paused in the center of the courtyard and looked up. Not at the window, not at her specifically. Just up, at the sky, for a moment, like a man checking the weather, or collecting himself, or simply taking one breath before doing something that required his full attention. Leora stepped back from the window. She got back into bed. She pulled the blanket over her head and lay very still and told herself she was sick, which was technically true, even if she had arranged it, and that she was staying right where she was, which was absolutely true and not negotiable under any circumstances. The house went quiet as the procession moved toward the great hall. She heard the doors open and close. She heard nothing for a long time after that. She nearly fell asleep twice. The marsh root had a drowsy quality in its later stages that she had not fully accounted for, and the warmth of the blanket and the distant, muffled sound of ceremony did something sedating to the part of her brain that had been running at high speed since before dawn. She was somewhere between waking and sleeping when she heard the footsteps. Not her mother's footsteps. She knew those. Not old Bryn returning. These were heavier, measured, the kind of footsteps that belonged to a man who was used to walking through places where people moved out of his way. They stopped outside her door. There was a pause, not the pause of someone who was uncertain, but the pause of someone who was being deliberate. Then a knock. Not a servant's knock. Not the tentative tap of someone checking whether you were decent. A single, clean knock from someone who knew that one would be enough. Leora sat up in bed. She pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. Her heart had made the decision to start moving very fast without consulting the rest of her. The door opened. The herald, a tall, narrow man in the king's gray and silver, stepped into the doorway and cleared his throat. "My lord the Alpha King, Calum Dre of the royal house, requests the presence of..." He stepped to the side. And Calum Dre walked into her room. He was, if anything, taller than he had looked from the window. He had the kind of face that had been shaped by weather and attention, rather than the soft regularity of men who spent their lives indoors. He looked at her the way people look at things they have been specifically trying to find, with a recognition that arrived before the introduction did. He looked at the clay cup on her bedside table. Then he looked back at her. The silence in the room was enormous. "You were not at the selection," he said. His voice was quieter than she expected. It had the low, even quality of someone who did not need to raise it to be heard. "I am unwell," Leora said. She said it with what she considered an impressive amount of steadiness. He did not answer that. He stepped forward, close enough that she could see his eyes clearly for the first time. Gray, like the rest of him, but not cold. There was something in them that she did not have a word for yet. He looked at her for a long moment, and it was not a look she knew how to manage, because it was not the look of someone assessing or deciding. It was the look of someone who had already decided and was simply making sure she understood what that meant. Then he leaned down. Not close enough to be inappropriate, close enough that she had to be completely still, or she would have moved away, which would have looked ridiculous from someone supposedly too ill to stand. He said, very quietly, "I will wait." He straightened. He turned. He walked out of the room. The herald followed, pulling the door shut behind him, and Leora sat in the ringing silence of the room they had left, and stared at the closed door, and tried to work out what had just happened. She noticed, slowly, that her hands were shaking. It was not the marsh root. The marsh root had mostly worn off by now. She knew exactly what the marsh root felt like. This was not it. She looked at the clay cup on her bedside table. In the morning light, the dark ring left by the tincture inside it was obvious. Too dark, too specific. The residue of something that had been made, not caught. He had looked at it. He had stood in her room and looked at that cup and looked at her and said 3 words and left. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, the drums had stopped. The selection was over. She did not know yet what that meant. She would find out, in the days that followed, that the king had completed his walk and had not chosen anyone. She would find out that he had stood at the end of the hall and spoken 3 words to his herald, and that the herald had written them down, with the expression of a man who had seen many things in his career and had not been prepared for this particular one. But right now, in the quiet of her room with the blanket still wrapped around her, and the empty cup on the table, and the smell of marsh root slowly fading from the air, she knew only this: that the Alpha King had come to her bedside, that he had looked at her like she was something he had been looking for, and that somewhere under the calculation and the fear and the very rational reasons she had built like a wall around the part of herself that still wanted to be found worth finding. Something small and old and not quite extinguished had taken a long, slow breath. She did not allow herself to name it. Not yet. She pulled the blanket tighter, looked at the ceiling, and told herself firmly that she was going to be very calm about this. Her hands shook the whole rest of the morning. Nobody talked about anything else. That was the first thing Leora noticed when she finally left her room on the evening after selection day. The estate had exactly one subject, and every conversation she walked past was inside it. The maids talked in the kitchen doorway. The stable hands talked by the fence. Her father's advisors stood in small clusters near the main hall and spoke in the careful, low voices of men who were trying to look like they were not talking about what they were absolutely talking about. The king had not chosen anyone. That had not happened in living memory. It had, in fact, not happened in recorded memory, or at least not in any record that anyone had immediate access to, which amounted to the same thing. Every Alpha King before Calum Dre had found his fated one at the very first selection. That was how the bond worked. That was what the bond was supposed to do. Calum Dre had walked through 43 women and chosen none of them, and then he had gone to the sick room of the one who was absent. Leora found out the number, 43, from her cousin Petra, who had been one of them, and was processing the afternoon with the efficient speed of someone who had genuinely not expected to be chosen, and was now, in the absence of that outcome, willing to be interested in the story instead. He walked very slowly, Petra said, dropping into the chair beside Leora's bed, because Leora had retreated there after approximately 10 minutes of being outside, which had been more than enough. Not like he was stalling, like he was paying attention. He looked at each of us. Really looked. Not just the quick glance some of the pack lords do at their own selections, where you can tell they have already decided, and the ceremony is just formality. Did he say anything to anyone? Leora asked, because she was interested, which she was absolutely not going to admit. Not during the walk. Petra twisted her bracelet around her wrist, a habit she had developed at age 7 and never stopped. At the end, when he had gone through all of us, he stood at the front of the hall for a moment, just standing. The whole room was completely quiet. And then he turned to his herald and said something, and the herald went pale, and the king left. What did he say? Petra looked at her. You haven't heard? I have been in bed. Right. Petra paused in a way that was slightly too long to be accidental. He said, Where is 44? Not a question. He said it like a statement. Leora said nothing. There were only 43 registered women in the territory this year. Petra continued. You were supposed to be the 44th. Your name was on the herald's list. Another pause. He knew your name was on the list. He would not have known which name belonged to which number. No, Petra agreed. But he knew the number was wrong. Leora looked at the ceiling. That is a coincidence, Petra said, with the fondness of someone who has known a person since childhood and knows exactly when they are performing calm. Leora. I am tired, Petra. You look completely fine. The healer said I should rest. The healer, Petra said, also told my mother last spring that her knee pain was from carrying too many books, and she had been gardening in the same position for 40 years. Old Bren is not infallible. Leora closed her eyes. Good night, Petra. Petra left, but not before giving Leora a look that contained approximately 12 separate observations she was choosing, For now, not to make. The night was not good. Leora lay awake listening to the estate settle into sleep around her. The sounds of lamps being extinguished, of doors closing, of the kitchen fire being banked, of the guards doing their slow rounds of the outer walls. She lay awake long after all of it went quiet, staring at the dark above her, and turning over the same 3 words in her mind, until they stopped being language, and became something else. I will wait. It was a strange thing to say. It was, in fact, a stranger thing to say than anything else he could have said in that room. He could have demanded she explain herself. He could have sent the herald to tell her to present herself at the hall the following morning. He could have smiled the way powerful men sometimes smiled at inconveniences, briefly and without warmth, and left without saying anything at all. He had said 3 words in the voice of a man making a decision that he intended to keep. She told herself this meant nothing. She had a significant amount of practice telling herself things meant nothing. She was, in her own estimation, fairly skilled at it. She did not sleep until nearly dawn. When morning came, she expected the royal party to be gone. That was the reasonable expectation. The selection was finished. The king had business in other parts of the kingdom, other pacts, other obligations that could not simply be set aside because one woman in one minor pack estate had decided she was too unwell to attend a ceremony. He would have left in the night or at first light, and the strange visit to her sick room would become the kind of story that got told at dinner tables, and gradually, as stories do, shifted from exact memory into something shaped by the telling. She rose, dressed, and went to the window. His horses were still in the stable yard. She actually pressed her forehead against the glass of the window for a moment. Then she straightened up and went to find her mother, because this required an adult who had more experience with situations that did not make sense. Alara Vane was in the small sitting room, in the chair she always occupied in the mornings, with the estate accounts open on the table in front of her. She looked up when Leora appeared in the doorway, and her expression did the thing it did when she had information and was deciding how to present it. He is staying, she said. For how long? He has not specified. Alara set down her pen. He asked your father for the use of the East guest quarters, for an indefinite period. He said it with considerable courtesy. Your father said yes. He said yes. Your father, Alara said, in the tone of a woman who had been married to Doran Vane for 26 years, and had long since stopped being surprised by his capacity for saying yes to things that came with a royal seal, said yes. Leora sat down in the chair on the other side of the table. What does he want? I did not ask him directly. One does not ask the Alpha King directly. You ask everyone directly. I ask everyone directly when the question will get an honest answer, her mother said. What I observed is this. He arrived with a small party, 5 riders and a herald, which is a minimal retinue for a king, and he has asked for nothing from us, except the room and the stable space for his horses. He has not sent for you. He has not placed any formal request. He simply appears to intend to be here. That is unusual, her mother finished. She picked her pen back up, which Leora had long recognized as a signal that the portion of the conversation Alara considered useful was complete. He has also, it seems, dismissed the rest of his formal selection court. They returned to the capital this morning. He is here with only his riders. Why are you so calm about this? Alara made a small mark in the accounts. Because being agitated about it will not change it. He is here. You were not at the selection. He has apparently decided that he does not consider the matter closed. She turned a page. Those are facts. The rest is just time. The rest, it turned out, was also very strange. The king and Leora found this out through the combined observation of Petra, 3 kitchen maids, a stable hand named Owen who talked too much, and her own increasingly frustrated reluctance to avoid every room that had a window, seemed to have absolutely no agenda. He ran in the mornings. The estate had a long path along its eastern boundary, through the tree line, and he ran it every day before the rest of the household was properly awake. He ran like someone who did this regardless of what else was happening. Not performance, not display, just the daily maintenance of a man who took his body seriously. Owen, who was out before dawn to see to the horses, reported that the king ran for about an hour and never looked tired when he came back, which Owen felt was deeply unfair but also, he admitted, impressive. In the afternoons he read. This was the part Leora found hardest to account for. He sat in the east garden, in the stone chair under the fig tree that her father had put there years ago for guests who wanted to be outside, but out of the main view, and he read with the complete absorption of a man who genuinely liked books and was not reading in order to be seen reading. On the second day she walked near enough to see the spine, and discovered it was a history of the Western Pac territories, written by a scholar whose name she recognized. She had a copy of it upstairs. He did not speak to her. He did not send the herald to her with messages. He did not appear at her door again. He ate in the east dining room, which was smaller and further from the main house, and he accepted whatever the cook sent without complaint or adjustment, which the cook found so unusual that she had mentioned it twice, in 2 separate conversations. He was just there. On the third day, Leora ran out of rooms. She had, over the previous 2 days, successfully avoided the main garden, the library, the east wing corridor, the courtyard, the front gate walk, and the dining room at all mealtimes. She had eaten in her own room twice, and in the kitchen once, which her mother had noticed and not commented on, which was its own kind of comment. On the third day she was in the corridor outside the library, and the door at the far end opened, and he walked through it. They stopped. He was carrying the history book. She was carrying nothing, because she had put down what she was carrying the instant she saw the door handle move, which was the kind of reflex she was not proud of. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You are still here," she said. It came out more directly than she had planned, but she had been awake for 2.5 nights, and her usual management of herself was not operating at full capacity. "You are still sick," he said. She opened her mouth, closed it. His eyes went very briefly to her hands, which were completely steady, because the marsh root had been completely gone from her system for 2 days now, and she had not been sick in any genuine sense since approximately 3 hours after she drank the tincture. Neither of them moved. The corridor between them was maybe 8 feet of stone floor, and dust-filtered afternoon light, and something that Leora could not name, and was not going to think about, until she was alone. "The library is available," he said, "if you were going there." "I was not going to the library." "All right." He waited. She became aware that she was the one who needed to move in some direction in order for this to resolve itself, because he appeared to be entirely comfortable standing in the corridor for as long as it took. She moved toward the library door. She was inside with the door closed behind her before she exhaled. She stood there for a full minute with her back against the door, looking at the rows of shelves, before she noticed that her heart was doing something unreasonable. She went to the shelf where she kept the history of the Western Territories. Her copy was there. She pulled it down and turned to the chapter on the northern boundary disputes and stared at the page without reading a single word of it. She thought about the way he had said, "You are still sick." Not as an accusation, not with the pointed edge of someone catching her in a lie. With the same quiet evenness as everything else he had said, as if he were simply observing a thing that was true, and the truth of it was interesting to him, and he was content to let it be true without requiring her to explain herself. That was the worst possible thing he could have done. If he had been angry, she would have known what to do. If he had been cold, or dismissive, or had treated her the way men who have power sometimes treat people who have inconvenienced them, with a very precise kind of patience that is actually controlled impatience wearing better clothes, she would have known exactly how to be in this situation. He was none of those things. She did not know what to do with a man who sat under a fig tree and read history books and said "you are still sick" with the same tone one might use for "it looks like rain." On the 4th day he was at the door handle at the same time she was. She was coming in from the herb garden with dirt on her hands and the mild, genuine ache of someone who had spent the morning doing something real and physical because she was tired of being in her own head. He was coming from the direction of the stable yard, and there was dust on his shoulder from the morning ride. Their hands landed on the door handle at the same moment. She pulled hers back. He held the door open for her. "Thank you," she said. "You were out early," he said. "I was in the herb garden." "I know," he said. "I could smell it." She went inside. She spent the next hour and a half arguing with herself about whether that had been an observation or something else entirely, and whether the distinction mattered, and why she was spending an hour and a half on it instead of simply deciding it was an observation and moving on with her life. She concluded that the distinction did not matter. She did not believe herself. On the 5th day, she looked for him without meaning to. She noticed it halfway through the morning, that her awareness of where he was in the estate at any given moment had become something automatic, the way you always know, without looking, where a fire is in a room. He was in the east garden with his book. He moved to the stables around midday. He was in the small dining room at the time she had now mapped as his mealtime. She noticed that she knew his routine. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and had a firm, private conversation with herself about what she was doing. The conversation resolved nothing. On the 6th day, her sister Marin arrived for the pack gathering that had been planned before any of this started, and Leora had 4 hours of warning and spent them organizing her feelings into something that would survive the encounter. It was not enough time. She had never found enough time for that. On the 6th evening, before Marin and Aldrich arrived, and everything became complicated in a different direction, Leora stood in the garden as the sun went down and watched the sky go through all its colors, the yellow gold, then the orange, then the soft gray purple, that meant the day was truly finished. She heard footsteps on the gravel path. She did not turn around. He stopped a short distance away, far enough to be respectful, close enough to be present. "You were not at the herb garden today," he said. "No. Something is coming," he said. It was not a question. She turned to look at him. In the fading light, he was all shadow and outline, the same solid stillness she had noticed from her window on the very first morning. "My sister is coming," she said. "Tomorrow." He nodded. "Once." "That is not the same as something being wrong," she said, which was technically true. He did not argue with it. He simply stood there with her while the last of the light went, and he did not ask for anything, and he did not fill the silence with reassurances she hadn't asked for, and when the dark had properly settled and the first lights in the house began to come on, he said goodnight in the same quiet voice and walked back toward the east wing. Leora stood in the garden for a while longer. She thought about the 43 women in the White Hall. She thought about how she had lain in her bed and listened to the drums change rhythm and felt, under all the calculation and the very sensible reasons, a pull toward a window. She thought about what it meant that a king with no reason to stay had stayed. She did not solve any of it, but she stood there long enough that something she had been carrying very tensely in her chest began, without her permission, to loosen slightly. She noticed it, she paid attention to it, and then she went inside and got ready for her sister to arrive. Marin arrived in a green carriage, with gold trim on the wheels, which was Aldrich's way of announcing that he had done well since the last time anyone had seen him. Leora watched from the upstairs window, the same window she had stood at on selection morning, which she was starting to think of as her observation post, and which she was starting to resent having developed a relationship with. Marin stepped out first, the way Marin always did, ahead of whatever moment was happening, so that she could arrange herself properly inside it. She was wearing a traveling dress the color of winter leaves, and her hair was up in the complicated style that required a personal maid and at least 40 minutes, and she was beautiful, in the easy, unthinking way of someone who had never been required to work at it. Behind her, Aldrich. Leora stepped back from the window. She went to her washstand and splashed cold water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror, with the expression of a woman reviewing her own defenses. Steady. Fine. She was 22 years old, and it had been 4 years, and she was completely fine. She went downstairs. Marin embraced her in the front hall, with the warmth of genuine affection, because Marin had always been kind, which had always made it worse and better in equal measure. "You look pale," Marin said, holding her at arm's length. "Were you actually sick, or was that—" She stopped. She had always been a quick reader of Leora's face, which was something Leora appreciated in general, and found inconvenient at specific moments. "I was not feeling well," Leora said. "I am better now." Marin looked at her for a beat longer than necessary. "The king is here." "Yes." "At our estate." "Yes." "Staying." "So it would appear." Marin did the quick calculation behind her eyes, that Leora recognized, the same calculation their mother had done, the same one Petra had done, and arrived, from the look of it, at some version of the same answer. But Marin, unlike their mother and unlike Petra, had a specific stake in Leora's romantic history that made her expression complicated in a way the others had not been. "Are you all right?" Marin asked. "I am always all right," Leora said, which was what she always said, and which Marin's expression indicated she had always received with the appropriate amount of skepticism. Aldrich appeared behind Marin's shoulder and said something polite and appropriate about the estate and the weather, and Leora said something polite and appropriate back, and the hall moved on around them in the way halls did, with servants and luggage and the general organized chaos of a household receiving guests. Leora got through the first evening. It was not as hard as she had expected, or perhaps it was exactly as hard as she had expected, and she had spent enough years preparing for it that she was efficient at it by now. She sat at dinner and talked about the right things and laughed at the right moments, and ate enough that no one could comment on her not eating, which was a technique she had developed at the age of 18 and found useful for getting through meals she did not want to be at. The king was not at dinner. He had been invited. Her father had extended the invitation with the careful formality he used for everything, and he had accepted with equal courtesy, and then, at the appointed hour, was not there. The herald had appeared with a quiet message about the king attending to correspondence, which everyone at the table accepted, and nobody entirely believed. Leora accepted it and believed it. She was not sure why she believed it, except that it fit with everything else she had observed, that he was a man who did not perform presence, who was there when he was there and not when he wasn't, without the elaborate stage management that most powerful men applied to their own appearances. She did not think about him for the rest of the evening. That was not accurate. She thought about him in the regular way of someone who is trying not to think about something and has therefore built a system of small mental tasks to keep herself occupied. She counted things. She paid very close attention to what other people were saying. She concentrated on the specific taste of what she was eating. These are all fine strategies for not thinking about something. They do not actually work. The second morning was the one that broke through her defenses. She was in the kitchen garden earlier than she usually came, because she had woken before dawn with the specific wakefulness of someone whose sleep has been interrupted by something they have not finished resolving, and she had decided that the best thing to do with that kind of wakefulness was to put it to physical use, before it put her to mental use first. She was cutting herbs, the tall-stemmed ones that grew along the east wall, rosemary and the broad-leaved mint, and the small pale flowers that old Bren used for the mild numbing paste he kept for stitching, when she heard the gate that connected the kitchen garden to the back path open, and she looked up, and Aldrich was there. He had the look of a man who had come outside because he wanted to be outside, not because he had planned to encounter anyone. When he saw her, he stopped, and there was a half-second where his expression did something she recognized, the involuntary flicker of a man who had forgotten, for a moment, that inconvenient things still existed. "Leora," he said, pleasantly. He said it the way you said the name of someone you had always been reasonably kind to. "Good morning," she said. She went back to cutting herbs. He came a few steps into the garden, because he was the kind of man who moved toward things rather than away from them, and he said, with the comfortable confidence of someone who had never spent 4 years rebuilding themselves from the base, "It is something, isn't it, the king being here? Your father must be pleased." "My father is always pleased when his daughters are noticed," she said, and managed to keep her voice entirely level. Aldrich laughed, easy and unthinking. "Always were the sharp one. Marin used to say that." She cut another sprig of rosemary. "Good luck with it," he said, with the expansive benevolence of a man who has everything he wants, and can therefore afford to wish other people well, without it costing him anything. "Truly, I hope it works out." She said thank you. She said it to the herb wall, not to him. He went back inside. She put the cut herbs in her basket, and stood very still for a moment, with her hand on the wall, and focused on the physical reality of the stone under her palm. The texture of it, the faint coolness of it, the roughness of the old mortar between the blocks. She had learned this technique after the original selection, when she had needed something external and simple to anchor herself to when the internal things got too loud. She stood there until the internal things got quieter. Then she turned, and found the king standing at the entrance to the garden. She had not heard him come. He moved quietly for a large man, not sneakily, just with the contained, economical motion of someone who was comfortable in his body, and did not feel the need to announce himself. He was standing just inside the gate, with both hands loose at his sides, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read, except that it was not the blank look of someone who had simply arrived at an inconvenient moment. He had been there long enough to see Aldrich leave. She was not going to show him that her hand was shaking. She put it in her pocket. "The garden is public," she said. "I know," he said. "I came to see it, not to interrupt." "You did not interrupt." He looked at her the way he looked at most things, fully, without hurry. She had the sensation, not for the first time, of being genuinely seen, which was different from being looked at, and which she was not prepared to talk about in a kitchen garden at 6 in the morning. "The herbs are good here," she said, because she needed to say something practical. "You know them," he said. "Not a question. My mother's cook taught me. And old Bren. Different uses." She held up the rosemary. "This one, for the joints and the headaches. The mint, for the stomach. The pale ones for the numbing." He crossed to where she was standing, not quickly, not with any sense of intrusion, just closing the distance the way you close a window because the air has changed, and looked at the herbs in her basket with the attention of someone who was actually interested. "The root," he said. "The marsh one. You grew it?" She went very still. "Not here," she said. "It does not grow well in cultivated ground. You have to find it by the rivers." "I know where it grows." He looked up from the basket. "I grew up near the Kern. There were stands of it along the bank." "It smells like mud and old leaves," she said, without meaning to. "Yes," he said. "It does." The silence that followed was not the silence of two people who had nothing to say. It was the silence of two people who both understood what had just been acknowledged, and were deciding, separately, what to do with that understanding. She could explain. She had an explanation. The explanation was Aldrich and the yellow dress, and 4 years of very carefully maintained invisibility, and it was also the genuine terror of being looked at, and found insufficient by something that was supposed to be fated, which was a fear she could not fully examine in the daylight yet, because it was too large, and too close, and too familiar. "I am not going to ask you to explain," he said. She looked at him. "I am not saying it does not matter," he continued. "I am saying, I would rather you told me when you chose to, than when you felt you had to." She looked at him for a long time. "That is a very patient position," she said. "I told you I would wait," he said. "I meant it in more than one direction." She picked up her basket. She walked toward the gate, and he moved out of her way, and she paused when she was level with him, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the morning air, which was still cool and damp with the night on it. "Why?" she asked. It was the real question. It was the one she had been turning over since the first day, and she had not meant to ask it here, in a kitchen garden with herbs in her basket and the smell of rosemary on her hands. But it appeared to be coming out now regardless of the setting she had planned for it. He turned to look at her. "Because the mark on my wrist appeared when I was standing in the corridor outside your door," he said, "and I have been carrying a faded bond for 6 days that points at a woman who was very obviously not in the room where she was supposed to be, and I find that—" He paused, and something moved briefly through his expression that was not quite amusement, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Interesting." She looked at his wrist. He pushed up his sleeve. The mark was there. It was not large, about the size of a coin, at the inside of the left wrist, a shape like a branching root. It was the color of old ink, and it was, she noticed, slightly raised at the edges, like it was still actively settling. It looked exactly like marsh root. She stared at it. "It appeared the moment I smelled river mud and old leaves coming from under a closed door," he said. "And then I knocked, and you opened it, and you looked at me like you were fully prepared to maintain a story you had prepared very thoroughly, and I thought—" The pause again, longer this time. "I thought, whoever this is, she had a reason." "I had a reason," she said. "I know," he said. "It was not about you," she said. "It was not. I did not know you would be the one. I did not think the bond would. I was not trying to refuse something I was offered. I was trying to avoid something I expected." "I know," he said again. "You cannot possibly know," she said. "I have not told you." "No," he agreed. "But I have been here for 6 days. And I have eyes." She looked at him. She looked at the mark on his wrist. She looked back at his face, and found there the same thing she had been finding there since the first day she had properly looked at it. The steady, quiet attention of someone who was not in a hurry, and was not performing patience, and was not making any of this into something smaller or larger than it was. She said, "I am going to think about this." He said, "All right." She went inside. She stood in the corridor just inside the door, with her basket and her herbs, and the smell of the garden still on her hands, and she did not think about the mark on his wrist. She thought about it for the entire rest of the day. She thought about the shape of it, the branching lines, the same lines she had seen 1,000 times in the shallow rivers where the marsh root grew low and spreading in the water. She thought about the fact that it had appeared outside a closed door. She thought about what it meant for something fated to find its way to a person who had gone to considerable lengths to be unfindable. She thought about whether she believed in things finding you even when you ran from them. She went to bed without an answer. But she woke up in the middle of the night, to the particular stillness that means something has moved inside you, not dramatically, not the way rivers flood, but the way they shift course, slowly, in the dark, in a direction you don't notice until the water is already somewhere new. She lay in the dark and knew that she was going to have to make a decision. Not yet, but soon. She thought, the morning after, about the 43 women in white linen. She had been making herself not think about that specifically, because thinking about it required thinking about the thing underneath it, the specific quality of standing in a room while someone walked past you, which she had experienced once and had no desire to experience again. But lying in the dark after the shift she had felt in the night, with the first gray light just starting at the edges of her curtains, she let herself think about it properly. 43 women. Calum Dre had walked among them for however long the selection took. She imagined it as slow. The way his walk through every space seemed to be slow. Not because he was uncertain, but because he was thorough. And he had felt nothing. Not the warmth of the bond, not the pull, not the recognition the old texts described as the fated meeting. Nothing. From 43 women who had dressed carefully and stood straight and been entirely, sincerely present in that room. And then, he had stood at the end of the hall and turned toward a corridor. She thought about what it would mean to be fated to a person who had arranged not to be there. She thought about whether that was the universe's idea of a joke, or a correction, or simply the completely value-neutral way that bonds worked, pointing at what they pointed at, regardless of whether that thing was in a convenient location. She thought about the king in the corridor, feeling the pull and the mark appearing on his wrist, and smelling river mud and old leaves through a closed door, and deciding, in that moment, to knock. He could have walked away. That was the thing she had not let herself sit with yet. He was the Alpha King. He had arrived at a territory, conducted the required ceremony, found no one, and had a perfectly reasonable exit available to him. He could have left. He could have called another selection. He could have done any number of things that did not involve spending a week in a minor pack estate eating stew from an uncertain kitchen and reading history books under a fig tree. He had knocked. And then, he had come back. She got up before the household woke and went to the library and stood in front of the shelf where the old records were kept, the pack histories, the bound volumes of the old selection chronicles that her father kept more out of obligation than genuine interest. She pulled down the one that covered the last 3 generations of Alpha Kings and flipped to the chapters on the fated bond. The language was old and slightly formal, the kind of prose that had been written by people who believed they were recording something sacred and wanted the weight of the words to reflect that. She read through it with the specific focus she brought to things she actually needed to understand, rather than things she was reading to fill time. The bond, the text said, was not a human thing. It was not the gradual accumulation of shared experience, or mutual recognition, or even attraction, though it frequently produced all of those as outcomes. It was older than any of that. It was the part of the woven bloodline that operated at the level of something that did not have a modern word, a knowing that was not intellectual, a recognition that bypassed the mind entirely and went straight to the blood. It could not be fooled. It could not be pointed in the wrong direction by proximity or want or wishful thinking, which meant, the text said in its formal, certain way, that when the mark appeared, it appeared for the right person, not a convenient person. Not a suitable person. The person. Leora sat down in the chair beside the shelf. She held the book in her hands and read that sentence again. The person. She thought about the woman she had been at 18, standing in the yellow dress, full of hope she had not even fully admitted to herself yet. She thought about the specific experience of watching something she had hoped for go to someone else, not because she had been evaluated and found wanting, but because the thing had simply pointed somewhere else, and she had been left standing in the direction it had not pointed. She thought about the years after that, about the invisible architecture she had built, the deliberate smallness, the careful self-containment, the practice of wanting as little as possible in rooms where wanting too much was dangerous. She thought about a man sitting under a fig tree reading history. She thought, he found you even after you hid. She put the book back. She went to the window at the end of the library corridor. Not the observation window, a different one that looked out over the east garden, and she looked at the stone chair under the fig tree, which was empty in the early morning, and she thought about decisions. Not the decision she had made with the tincture. That decision had been made from fear, and she understood it, and she did not entirely regret it, because it had produced this slow, strange thing that was happening between her and a king who had no reason to be patient and was being patient anyway. The other decision, the one she could feel coming, whether to step out of the space she had built and let herself be findable again. It was a terrifying thing to consider. She stood at the window for a long time. The fig tree in the garden had leaves that moved in the early wind, each one separate, catching and releasing the light. She had sat under that tree as a child, in the summer, when the figs were ripe and heavy, and her father used to walk the garden with her before his day got busy. She had loved that tree in the uncomplicated way you love things when you are young and have not yet been disappointed by them. She thought, you still love it. It had not done anything wrong. She went to find breakfast. Caleb was in the corridor again, coming from the east wing as she came from the library, and this time they both saw each other far enough in advance that there was no door handle and no accidental closeness. They simply walked toward each other from opposite ends of the hall, and met in the middle, and stopped. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She looked at him in the ordinary, even light of a corridor in early morning, without the drama of a sickbed or the charged air of a kitchen garden conversation. He looked back. He had the same quality she had been cataloging for a week now, the quality of a person who was entirely present in the moment they were in, not managing it, not performing it, just in it. "I read something last night," she said, "in the old selection texts." "What did it say?" "That the bond cannot point at the wrong person." He was quiet for a moment. "That is what I was taught," he said. "Does it feel like that?" she asked. "From your side of it?" He considered this honestly, which she appreciated, not the quick reassurance of a man who knew the expected answer and gave it. "It feels like certainty," he said finally. "Not always comfortable certainty, just certain, like knowing north when you are in the dark without a compass. You do not see it, you feel it, and you either trust it or you spend a very long time facing the wrong way." She thought about that. "I have been facing the wrong way for a while," she said. It came out quieter than she intended, more honest than she had planned. He did not fill the space after it with something reassuring. He let it be what it was. "I know," he said. "You do not have to explain that to me today." "I know I don't have to," she said. She walked past him toward the dining room. She almost looked back. She did not. But she thought, for the first time, that she might be ready to, eventually. Marin found her on the back steps the evening after the garden conversation. Leora was sitting with her knees together and her hands in her lap, looking at the dark field behind the estate, where the fireflies came out every summer at this time of year, early, before the heat set in properly, when the nights were still cool enough that you could sit outside without the thick, pressing warmth that came later. They moved in slow spirals above the grass, green gold and unhurried, and she had been watching them for about 20 minutes, and finding them, on balance, more useful company than her own thoughts. "May I sit?" Marin asked. "It's your family's estate too," Leora said. Marin sat, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, in the way she had always sat beside Leora since they were children, not giving space out of politeness, but filling it out of affection. They did not talk for a while. A firefly came close enough that Leora could see the green light pulse on and off, like a tiny heartbeat. "Aldrich told me he ran into you in the kitchen garden this morning," Marin said. "He came outside for some air," Leora said. "He said you were very pleasant." "I am always pleasant," Marin was quiet for a moment. No, she said, gently. You are always kind. You are not always pleasant. Pleasant is what you do when you are managing a situation. Kind is what you are when you are not thinking about it. Leora looked at the fireflies. I manage things, she said. It is a useful skill. I know. Marin's voice was the same as it always was, warm, steady, carrying the quality of someone who had always meant well and mostly did well, and was also, unavoidably, the person at the center of one of the hardest things that had happened to Leora. I have known for a long time. I think I knew at the selection when you kept smiling, and I could see the exact spot where the smile was held together. Leora did not say anything. I did not choose it, Marin said. I need you to know that I have never wanted you to. I did not pick it at your expense. It happened, and I was glad, and I still am. But I have also spent 4 years knowing that it cost you something, and not knowing how to talk to you about it. It did not cost me anything, Leora said. The bond is not directed by human choice. I know that. I have always known that. Knowing something and feeling it are different things, Marin said. You taught me that. When I was 16, and terrified of something, and you sat with me, and said knowing you will be fine, and feeling safe, are not the same. So sit here, until you feel it. Leora remembered that. The corridor outside their old room at the main pack house, the one with the stone floor that was always cold, and Marin, sitting with her back against the wall, and her arms wrapped around her own knees, younger and frightened. Leora had been 18, already certain she was going to have to manage everyone else's feelings as well as her own, and somehow not resentful of it. I am all right, Leora said. I believe you, Marin said. I also believe that all right is not the same as well. The fireflies pulsed on and off in the dark field. He is here, Marin said carefully, meaning the king. He is here, and he is not trying to pressure you into anything, from what I can see. And you have been... She paused. You have been lighter this week than I have seen you in a long time, even with everything. I am not lighter, Leora said. Marin said, with the very specific love of a sister who knows when not to press. All right. She shifted on the step, pulling her shawl tighter. You know I am on your side, whatever that means in any given situation. You know that. I know, Leora said. And she did know. That had never been the problem. The problem was not the people who were on her side. The problem was the wall she had built in herself, efficiently and thoroughly, out of reasonable materials, old hurt and reasonable caution, and the very practical understanding that wanting things in rooms where you might not get them was how you ended up sitting on stone steps in the dark cataloging fireflies, instead of being inside where it was warm. They sat until the night got cold. Then they went inside, and Marin squeezed her hand before they parted ways at the top of the stairs, and Leora stood in her room for a long time after, not quite ready to sleep. She thought about what lighter meant, whether it was true. She thought, it might be. She was not sure what to do with that. The next morning she went looking for him deliberately, which was a new development. She found him in the small dining room before breakfast was set, standing at the window that looked out over the stable yard, with a cup of something hot in his hands, and the particular stillness of a man in the middle of his own private morning, before the rest of the day required anything from him. She came in without knocking, because the door was open, and he turned when he heard her step. I want to show you something, she said. He put his cup down. She led him through the east garden, past the fig tree, through the gate in the low stone wall, and out along the path that ran beside the old irrigation channel behind the estate. The channel was dry now. It had been dry since before she was born, its original purpose long obsolete, but the bed of it was full of the specific plants that grew where water had once been, and left something of itself behind in the soil. She had been coming here since she was old enough to leave the garden unattended. Here, she said, and stopped where the channel curved, where the bank dropped slightly, and the ground was still damp in the mornings, from some underground source she had never tracked down. The marsh root grew in a long, low stand along the bank. It was unremarkable looking, flat, spreading, with leaves the color of dark river water, and it smelled exactly like mud and old seasons, and the specific cool freshness of water you had not yet touched. He stood beside her and looked at it. I used to collect it for old Bren, she said. Before I found the other use for it. She paused. The tincture requires the root itself, not the leaves. You have to dig carefully, or you destroy the growing structure. It takes about 20 minutes of proper work. You have made it before, he said. Once, she said. Before selection morning. Not a habit then. No. He crouched down by the bank and looked at the plants with the same focused attention he brought to everything, as if the marsh route was worth understanding properly, rather than just observing in passing. When I was 14, he said, I broke 2 fingers. Getting into a fight, I knew I was going to lose. She looked at him. What is the connection? My father made me stand the entire dinner that evening, rather than sit, because I was not injured in a way that required sitting, but I had made a choice that embarrassed the house. He stood back up. He was not wrong. I had made a poor choice, but I remember thinking, he is not asking why. He is responding to what I did without knowing what made me do it. She was quiet. I have always thought that was a failure of patience, Calum said. Not on his part necessarily. He had other children and a kingdom. He did not have limitless time for the why. But it is a thing I have carried as an intention, to ask the why before responding to the what. You have not asked me, she said. I have not needed to, he said. The why is visible, not the details, but the shape of it. She looked at the marsh root. She thought about the shape of it, the spreading structure, the way it did not grow up but out, keeping itself low, close to the ground, in the places where water had once been and left. I stood in a selection once before this, she said. Not yours. A smaller one. I was 18. He waited. There was a man. She said it without affect, the way you say old weather. He walked past me. He stopped at my sister. She paused. That is all. That is the entire story. He was not cruel. He did not even notice that there was something to be noticed. He simply walked to where his bond pointed, and I was not it. And 4 years later, Calum said. 4 years later I decided to stop standing in rooms where I could be looked at and found insufficient. But the bond does not find insufficiency, he said. The bond does not evaluate. I know, she said. I know that intellectually. I knew it at 18, and I kept knowing it for 4 years, and somehow knowing it did not reach the part that was still standing in the room expecting to be looked over. The irrigation channel caught a bit of morning light at the curve, and for a moment, the dry bed of it looked almost like water. The silver-gray shimmer that was just light on pale stone but red, for a second, as something moving. The part that was still standing in the room, he said. Is it still? She considered this honestly. It was the first time she had been asked directly, in a form that required a direct answer rather than management. Less so, she said, than it was. He nodded. That is enough, he said. Not the way people said it when they were settling for less than they wanted. The way people said it when they understood proportion. They walked back along the channel path in the direction of the estate. The morning had warmed slightly, enough that the dew was coming off the grass in the thin mist that meant the day would be clear. She walked beside him rather than ahead of him, which she noticed as a change from the first days, when she had consistently arranged to be moving away from any space he was in. Your sister is kind, he said. She is, Leora said. And the man with her. He paused in the careful way of someone choosing words thoughtfully, rather than carelessly. He was in the garden yesterday morning. Yes. He is the kind of man, Calum said, with the measured neutrality of someone declining to say what they actually think, who takes up more space than he has earned. Leora made a sound that was something like a surprised breath, and something like agreement. That is a very diplomatic way to put it, she said. I am very diplomatic, he said, without particular evidence that he believed this to be one of his stronger qualities. She looked at him sideways and found, to her genuine surprise, that the corner of his mouth had moved. Not a full smile. Just an acknowledgement that he had made a dry observation and was aware of it. She thought, he has a sense of humor. He has been here 8 days, and I have not seen it until now, because he has not been performing anything. And humor, in its true form, does not perform. It arrives when something is genuinely funny, and leaves when it isn't. You are funny, she said, with the slightly accusatory tone of someone who had not budgeted for this development. Occasionally, he said. They reached the gate in the stone wall. She held it open for him and he went through, and then he held the estate door at the end of the path and she went through, and they parted in the corridor. Him toward the east wing, and her toward the kitchen, where she had planned to help prepare the morning herbs before the cook arrived. Just two people walking along a dry irrigation channel, talking about why. She went in to prepare the herbs. She was humming by the time the cook arrived, which the cook found surprising enough to mention, and which Leora found surprising enough to stop immediately, and then, after a moment, let herself start again. The pack gathering that afternoon was the largest social event the estate had hosted since a summer celebration 3 years prior, and Doran Vane had been preparing for it, with the careful energy he brought to anything that required the right people to see the right things happening in the right order. The gathering was, officially, a routine territory meeting, the twice-yearly assembly of the minor lords and their families, who owed nominal allegiance to the Vane pack, gathering to discuss the season's trading arrangements and the state of the roads and the general health of the region. This kind of meeting had happened regularly for as long as Leora could remember. They were not particularly exciting. They involved a great deal of careful conversation about grain prices and a mediocre buffet of preserved meats and the kind of polite socializing that exhausted her by the third hour. They had never previously included an Alpha King. The effect of Calem's presence on the assembly was quiet, but total. The way the presence of a large animal changes a room, not through action, but simply through being there. People were more careful with their words. They stood a little straighter. Conversations that would have meandered became more purposeful. Even the grain price discussion had an unusual crispness to it, as if everyone felt that imprecision might be noted. Leora moved through the gathering with the practiced ease of someone who had attended enough of these to know how to be present in them without being consumed by them. She spoke to Lord Gavin, who managed the northern trading route and had strong feelings about road maintenance. She spent time with his wife, Prue, who had always been kind to her, and who asked after her health with genuine concern. She checked on the food arrangements twice, because the cook was managing a larger service than usual, and Leora had learned years ago that the person most likely to need support in any large event was the one who was trying to hold everything together in the background. She was refilling a serving plate near the window when she felt the specific quality of attention that meant she was being watched. Not by him. She had become, in the past 10 days, quite good at locating where he was in any given room, in the way you become good at finding true north. It was not something she chose to do, it simply happened, and she had stopped arguing with it. It was Aldrich. He was standing with a small group of the other minor lords near the far wall, holding a cup he was not drinking from, and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has a thought he is deciding whether to act on. She turned back to the plate. He came over anyway. She had known he would. He was that kind of man, the kind for whom an impulse and an action lived in the same breath, who saw something he wanted to say, and said it before the second thought arrived to suggest he might not. "The king has been attentive," Aldrich said, positioning himself beside her at the window with the pleasant, conversational ease of someone who has decided this will be a casual exchange. "Interesting development." "It is," Leora said. "For the family, I mean. For your father." "It is a significant thing." He said this in the benevolent, proprietary tone of a man who considered himself invested in the well-being of the Vane family by virtue of his marriage to one of its members, and who had never quite calibrated how that landed from the outside. "It is," she said again. "I hope you will not let it." He paused, choosing, and she could see him doing it, the micro-calculation of a man who was about to say something mildly pointed and wanted the right frame for it. "Overwhelm you. A king's attention can be a heavy thing for someone who is not accustomed to it." She set down the tongs she had been holding. She turned to look at him directly. "Aldrich," she said. She said it with the complete composure of a woman who had had 4 years to understand exactly what she was looking at. "You have confused concern with condescension your entire life, and I do not think today is the day you are going to stop. But I appreciate the sentiment." He blinked. "I am going to rejoin the gathering now," she said. "Enjoy the evening." She walked away. She did not look back. Her heart was doing the fast, loud thing it did when she said something she had been not saying for a long time. The specific internal sound of a wall developing a crack, not because it was failing, but because it had decided to. She found herself near the east window, slightly apart from the nearest conversation cluster, and she stood there, and breathed steadily, and let her pulse return to something normal. And when she looked up, the king was on the other side of the room, and he was looking at her. He had seen none of it. She was certain of that. The window had been private, the conversation too low to carry. But he was looking at her with that specific quality of attention she was still trying to find a word for, the full presence of someone who did not look at things by halves. She held his gaze across the room. That was new. She had been looking away, consistently, deliberately, for 10 days. Not because she was frightened exactly, more the way you don't look directly at a bright light. Not because it is dangerous, but because you need time to adjust before you can properly see it. She looked. He looked back. After a moment he lifted his cup slightly. Not a toast, not a gesture of any significance. Just an acknowledgement that was small enough to be deniable, and clear enough to be understood. She looked back to the gathering. She was smiling before she noticed she was doing it. She stopped deliberately. Then she let it come back, quietly, in the direction of the window and the dark evening outside it, where nobody needed to see it except her. She allowed herself that much. It was, she thought, a start. The gathering ran long into the evening, and by the time the last carriage had gone down the front drive, the estate felt like a room after a fire had been let out, large and quiet, and still carrying faint warmth in all its corners. Leora helped carry cups back to the kitchen. This was not required of her, and the kitchen staff would have managed perfectly well without her, but she did it anyway, because she was not yet ready to be alone with her thoughts about the evening, and moving between the gathering room and the kitchen gave her an acceptable occupation, while those thoughts arranged themselves. The cook, whose name was Nell, and who had the confident demeanor of a woman who had kept large households fed through every kind of occasion, gave Leora a look when she came in with the fourth tray. "You can leave those, miss," Nell said. "I am not tired," Leora said. "Nor am I," Nell said, "but I notice you've made 4 trips for cups that could have been done in 2, and I think you are thinking about something." Leora set down the tray. "Am I that obvious? You carry things when you're thinking. You always have. Your mother stacks books. Your father reorganizes the study. You carry things." Nell wiped her hands on her apron. "Whatever it is, we'll keep until morning, most likely." Leora looked at the neat rows of cups on the counter. "Someone said something to me tonight," she said, not planning to say it, but finding it coming out anyway. "Someone who has always thought less of me than they pretended, and tonight I told them so." Nell regarded her with the focused interest of a person who has been embedded in a family long enough to know every name and every history. "Which someone?" she said carefully. "It does not matter which one. All right." Nell picked up a cloth and began to dry the nearest cups with the systematic ease of a woman who could do this in her sleep. And how did it feel? Saying it. Leora thought about it honestly. "Loud," she said. "Inside. Like something shifting." "That is usually how it feels," Nell said. "When you say the thing you have been not saying, it's loud because it's been pressed down for a while, and it needs the space once it's out." "It was 4 words," Leora said. "4 words can hold a lot," Nell said. Leora picked up the cloth on the other side of the counter and started drying cups beside her. Nell did not comment on this. They worked in the comfortable, parallel silence of the kitchen, the sound of pottery and water and the low tick of the fire settling, and Leora let her thoughts come at their own pace, instead of trying to organize them before they arrived. She thought about Aldrich's face when she had turned to look at him directly, the blink, the recalibration of a man who had not expected that particular response from that particular person. She thought about the fact that she had been giving him a different response, carefully and consistently, for 4 years, because the correct response required energy she had been using for other things, and also required a kind of solidity she was only now beginning to feel she could rely on. She thought about the king's cup, lifted across the room. She thought about how she had smiled in the direction of the window. She dried the last cup and set it on the shelf and said goodnight to Nell and went upstairs, and she went to sleep faster than she had in 2 weeks, which she noticed was interesting. In the morning the estate was quieter. Most of the gathering attendees had stayed overnight in the guest rooms, and they filtered out through the early morning in 1s and 2s, their carriages moving down the front drive in the low gray light. Leora watched from the upstairs corridor window and counted them going, the way she always counted departures, not with sadness, just with the particular attention that meant she was taking inventory. Marin and Aldrich were among the last to leave. Marin found her before the carriage was brought around, in the small sitting room where Leora had gone with her embroidery, because the sitting room had good morning light, and she was genuinely, simply, doing embroidery, which was not a metaphor for anything. "We are going," Marin said from the doorway. "I know," Leora set down the needle. "Is he?" She did not finish. "In the carriage already," Marin said. She came in and sat down on the small chair beside the window, and for a moment, they were just two sisters in a morning room, which was a thing they had been 100 times before and which felt, today, slightly different from those 100 times in a way that was hard to define. "I said something to him last night," Leora said, "at the gathering." Marin was quiet for a moment, then, "I know. He told me. Not everything, I think, but enough." She looked at her hands. "He does not have great understanding of what it costs people to be kind to him when they have reason not to be. I think he has always taken it as simply how people are." "I know," Leora said. "I am sorry," Marin said, "for the part of it that I am part of. I have wanted to say that for a long time, and did not know if it would help or make it worse." "It helps," Leora said. It was true. Not because it changed anything, but because being told a thing matters is not nothing, even when the matter is old and mostly settled. Marin reached across and took her hand and held it for a moment. Then she stood and said she would miss her, and that they should visit more, and she meant it. And Leora said the same and also meant it. And then the carriage sounds came from outside, and Marin left, and the sound of wheels on the drive came and then faded, and the estate went quiet in the specific way it did after guests departed, like a deep breath let out all at once. She did not realize she had been holding something tight until it released. She sat in the morning room for a while, with her embroidery in her lap, not working on it, just sitting. The light moved across the floor in the slow way of late morning light that means the clouds are passing, but the day is still deciding itself. A knock at the door. "Come in," she said. The herald appeared, neat and formal as always, with the air of a man for whom formality was a genuine comfort rather than a performance. "His Majesty the King asks if you would join him for a walk," the herald said. "At your convenience, no obligation." She looked at her embroidery. She set it down on the seat. "Tell him I will be down in 5 minutes," she said. The herald nodded and withdrew. She went to the small mirror by the door and looked at herself in it, not to check if she looked well, but in the way you look at yourself sometimes when something has shifted and you are trying to see if it shows from the outside yet. She looked the same. Dark hair, ordinary face, the shadows under her eyes that always appeared when she had been thinking too much at night. She looked like herself. She went downstairs. He was waiting near the east door, not impatiently, just waiting. He had his gray coat on, and his hands were not in his pockets, which she had noticed was his version of formal. When he expected to be in company, he didn't put his hands anywhere, as if he had been taught, long ago, that a man of his position should always keep his hands visible and available. He looked at her when she came down the stairs. "The gathering went long," he said. "They always do," she said. "There is always someone who has one more thing about the grain." "I find," he said, "that it is never actually about the grain." "No," she agreed. "It is about the roads. The grain is a front." He held the door open, and she went through into the garden, and they fell into step together easily, which was a thing she noticed as a change from the beginning of the week, when every step they had taken in shared space had been slightly careful, like two people navigating around the same piece of furniture in a room they were still learning. They walked through the east garden and out the back gate and along the channel path. The marsh route was bright in the morning along the bank, low and spreading, and she stopped without planning to. "I need to tell you something," she said. He stopped beside her. He did not brace for it. He just waited, fully present, the way he waited for everything. "I have been afraid of this," she said. She said it to the channel bank, then made herself turn to say it to him properly. "Not of you specifically, of the thing this is, the bond. What it means to be seen as the person a bond chooses, because I have been in a room where a bond chose not me, and what I learned from that is not that bonds are wrong, because I know they are not wrong. What I learned is that I was not ready for what it felt like to be in that room again." He was listening, completely, the way rivers listen. "I drank the tincture because I was not ready," she said. "And then you came to my room, and you said what you said, and I have spent 10 days being less afraid than I was, which is," she stopped, "unexpected." He looked at her for a moment. His expression was one she had been cataloging for the better part of 2 weeks, and still had not found a single word for. It was not softness exactly, not sympathy. It was something older than both of those things. I know what it is to stand in a room and feel the thing you are waiting for. Point somewhere else, he said. He said it quietly, without the particular weight of someone who wants recognition for sharing. Just plain. She looked at him. You were never in a selection before this one. The bond was supposed to find you at the first. Not at a selection, he said. At 17. There was a girl I had thought. He paused in the way of someone choosing precision over speed. It does not matter the details. What I mean is that wanting something to point toward you and finding that it doesn't, that is not a small thing to carry. And I carried it for 5 years before the selection, thinking the next one would be the one where the mark appeared, and trying to understand what it meant about me that it didn't. She was very still. What did it mean? She asked. Nothing, he said, as far as I could ever determine. The bond pointed where it pointed when it was ready. My history before it had no bearing on where it pointed. She looked at the marsh root along the bank, the small flat leaves, the spreading root under the water soil, growing low and wide rather than up. I kept myself low for a long time, she said. After the selection with Marin, I made myself smaller, I think. Took up less space. It seemed safer. And now, he said. She thought about the 4 words she had said to Aldrich last night. The crack in the wall. Nell drying cups and saying 4 words can hold a lot. I think I am done being small, she said. It came out certain. She had not planned it to come out certain, but it arrived that way. The way some sentences do. Already made, waiting to be spoken. He looked at her with the expression she had no word for, and she held it without looking away this time. Then we are in agreement, he said. The morning was fully open now, the clouds gone, the sun coming through the gap in the trees at the curve of the channel path, and landing on the watergrass, and the marsh root, and the dry pale stone of the channel bed, turning all of it briefly gold. She breathed it in. She breathed out. It was, she thought, the first full breath she had taken in 4 years. They did not go back to the estate immediately. She had not planned for that. The walk had had a clear shape in her head, out along the channel, the conversation, back to the gate, the estate door, the natural end of things. But after the moment on the bank with the morning light coming gold through the trees, they simply kept walking, and the path continued, and neither of them turned around. The channel ran for about half a mile behind the estate before it met the boundary wall of the old property that had been empty for years. At the boundary there was a gap in the stone, where one of the old sections had partially fallen, and beyond it, visible through the gap, was an open slope of meadow grass that ran down to a line of poplars, and beyond the poplars, catching the morning light in long horizontal flashes, the Kern River. She had not been down to the river in years. The Kern, she said. You mentioned it, that you grew up near it. The upper section, he said. Higher than this. The river is narrower there and moves faster. It sounds different, more urgent. He paused. This part is slower. They stood at the gap in the wall, looking at the river in the distance. The light on it was the particular silver white of morning water, still and shifting at the same time. My father used to bring me here, she said, when I was small. Before the estate got larger and his time got smaller, he used to say that any problem looked different from beside a river, because rivers do not care about problems, they simply move. Does it work? He said. Sometimes, she said, depends on the problem. They stood together at the gap in the wall. The wind came through it, carrying the river smell, green and cold and mineral, the smell of water over old stone. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to answer honestly rather than diplomatically. I am not especially diplomatic, he said, as I think I admitted. You are more diplomatic than you claim, she said. But all right. She turned to look at him. What happens if I decide I am not ready? Not yet, or not in the way the bond requires. What happens if I need more time than you expected? Or if the thing in me that has been low for 4 years takes longer to come back up than either of us wants? He was quiet for a moment, not the pause of calculation, the pause of someone taking a real question seriously. Nothing happens, he said. A king without a fated mate, she said. That has consequences. Yes, he said. Real ones. The court has opinions. The council has opinions. There are pressures I am aware of, and that you should know exist. He said this plainly, without using the pressures as leverage. But those pressures have a limited effect on what I intend to do, which is this. I will not push you toward a thing you are not ready for. If you need a month, I will be here in a month. If you need a year, that is harder logistically, but I can arrange a great deal when I need to. She looked at him. You would wait an actual year? I would wait longer than that, he said, without drama. The mark on my wrist is not a deadline, it is an answer. I already have the answer. I can afford to be patient about the timing. She turned this over. She had been waiting, she realized, for the other side of him to appear. The side that came with the title, the impatience of someone accustomed to immediate compliance, the moment when the gentleness revealed itself to be performance. She had been watching for it the way you watch for weather. It had not appeared. It was beginning to occur to her that perhaps it was simply not there. You are a different kind of man than I was prepared for, she said. Is that good or bad? He said. He asked it with the same genuine interest he seemed to bring to everything. Undecided, she said, leaning toward good. He looked at the river. I will take leaning toward good, he said. They walked back along the channel. The path was in full sun now, the dew long gone, the ground warm and dry underfoot. She walked beside him, and was aware of all the small particular things of walking beside him, the way his stride was longer than hers but he had adjusted it without appearing to, the way his hands were loose and quiet at his sides, the way he was there but not pressing, present but not filling all the available space. She had been trying, for 10 days, to find the thing that was wrong with him, the thing that would make the whole situation resolve itself into something manageable, a fatal flaw, an impatience, a coldness underneath the quiet, something that would confirm the wisdom of the wall she had built. She had not found it. She had found instead a man who ran before dawn, and read history books, and ate stew without complaint, and said, I will wait, and meant it in every possible direction. She thought about the selection. 43 women, none of them the one, and then a corridor, and river mud, and a mark on a wrist shaped like the root of a plant that smelled like old seasons. She thought, the bond does not find insufficiency, the bond does not evaluate. It had found her. In a sick room, with marsh root residue on her bedside table and a very strategic fever, it had found her. I want to tell you the rest of it, she said. They were almost at the gate, not today, but soon. The whole of it, the selection, Marin, what I did to myself afterward. I want you to know it properly. When you are ready, he said. I think I am almost ready, she said. Almost ready is close enough, he said. She opened the gate. She held it for him. He went through, and she followed, and the estate morning opened around them. The smell of the kitchen, the sound of the stable yard, the ordinary running life of a house in its daytime, and she walked back into it feeling, for the first time in a long time, like she was not walking into a space she had made herself small enough to fit. She was walking into it as herself, full size. She found that the estate, which had always been large, accommodated her without any difficulty at all. She told him in the library. Not because the library was the planned location. She had not planned a location, or a time, or even a sequence. She had said soon, and he had said, when you are ready. And then 3 days had passed in which she had been doing something she could only describe as quietly building up to it, like the gathering of weather, before a change in season. On the 12th day of his stay, she went to the library after supper, because she could not sleep, and the library was the room she had always gone to when she could not sleep, and he was already there. He was in the chair by the south window, with the lamp burning low beside him, reading the second volume of the Western Territories history, which she knew because her copy was the same edition, and she recognized the binding. He looked up when she came in. I cannot sleep, she said. Nor can I, he said. She sat down in the chair on the other side of the lamp. The library at night was a different room from the library in the day, quieter, smaller feeling, the lamplight making pools of warm color in the shelves, and the rest of the room going soft and dark beyond them. She had always liked it better at night. I want to tell you now, she said. He put the book down. She told him. She told it plainly, the way she had told herself she would, if she ever told it. Not dressed up, not explained more than necessary, not softened. She told him about being 18, and the yellow dress, and the selection in the main pack hall, and the specific, surgical quality of watching Aldrich's steps slow next to Marin, and not slow next to her. She told him about the months after, the ones where she had kept showing up to things, and smiling, and being the right kind of present, and the quieter months after those, when she had started to understand what she was doing to herself, and had chosen to do it anyway, because the alternative required more of herself than she had available. She told him about Marin, about loving her sister genuinely, and without condition, and also about the complicated underside of that, the way Marin's happiness had always made Leora happy, and the way that was true, and also the way it had sometimes felt like being asked to love a fire that also burned you, and the way she had decided it was not Marin's fault, and it was not her fault, and it was simply the particular arrangement of things that a life sometimes produced, and you either found a way to carry it, or it carried you. She told him about deciding to be small, about the years of careful, deliberate reduction, of want, of expectation, of the particular hope that had been the engine of every time she had ever entered a room where something good might happen, about how she had discovered that you could, in fact, successfully deactivate that engine if you were thorough enough about it, and about how the quiet that followed was not peace, but its convincing imitation. And she told him about the tincture, about standing in her kitchen after midnight and grinding the dried root and thinking with complete clarity that she was going to do this thing, and the reasons were real and legitimate, and also that somewhere under the real and legitimate reasons was a simpler and less presentable truth, which was that she could not bear to stand in another room where she might be invisible again. She told him all of it in about 20 minutes. She had thought it would take longer. It did not. When she finished, the lamp was still burning the same way it had been. The library was exactly as quiet as it had been. Calum was looking at her with the expression she still had not found a single word for. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she said. "For telling me. For telling me now." He said it the way he said most things, without excess, without performance, but with the particular quality of meaning it. She nodded. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the lamp. Then he said, "I was told when I was young that the fated bond was a gift, that the Alpha King's mark was the clearest evidence of something the rest of the world had to work out through trial and years, that you did not have to guess, that when the mark appeared, the question was answered." "Is that not what it is?" she said. "In some ways," he said. "But I spent 17 years after that understanding, growing up, and learning that the gift was the answer, not the ease. The bond appearing does not mean the thing it points to is simple. It means it is true." He paused. "What you have told me is not a reason for the bond to have pointed differently. It is a reason for it to have waited until you had a chance to hear it." She sat with that. "You think it waited," she said. "I think you were not ready at 18, he said. "And neither, probably, was I at 20. And the bond, whatever it is, whatever old thing it is in the blood, I think perhaps it knew that." She had not thought about it that way. She had thought about the bond as a thing that pointed at a target. She had not thought about it as a thing that had patience. "That is a great deal of trust to place in something neither of us fully understands," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is. And yet you trust it." "I trust the mark on my wrist," he said. "It has not been wrong about the direction. I am willing to let it be right about the timing as well." She looked at the lamp. She thought about the 20 minutes she had just spent saying the most honest version of a thing she had never said out loud to anyone. She thought about how he had listened, completely, without interrupting, without the small sounds people made to demonstrate that they were moved or present, which she had always found slightly intrusive. He had simply been there, attending, the way good listeners were there, and she had felt the difference between being listened to and being heard. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "Why did you walk among the 43, she said. "I mean, you knew, from the moment in the corridor, that the mark had appeared. You could have stopped then. You could have told the herald and ended the ceremony. Why did you finish it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because they deserved to have it completed properly," he said. 43 women had prepared and traveled and stood in a hall waiting. Whatever the answer was, they had come in good faith. Ending it abruptly would have been imprecise. He paused. "And I thought, whoever 44 is, she is still here somewhere. The ceremony ending early would not change that." She thought about the 43, about what it had been like to be in that hall. Petra had said he had moved slowly, had actually looked. She thought about what it meant to walk through a selection, knowing you had already found the answer, and doing it anyway, because the other women in the room deserved to be treated as people and not scenery. That was decent of you, she said. It was the least that was owed to them, he said. She looked at him across the pool of lamplight. The south window was dark behind him, the estate and the garden invisible beyond the glass, and the light made him look, not softer exactly, but more complete, the way things look in lamplight when you have begun to know them well enough to look without the careful distance. I have been afraid of you, she said. Not of you specifically, of what you represent, of the possibility that the bond, once I stood still long enough to face it, would feel like another room where I was being evaluated. Does it feel that way? He said. She thought about it honestly. The 12 days, the walks along the channel, the corridors, the fig tree, the morning garden, the library. No, she said. What does it feel like? He said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, like something I grew up near, something familiar, that I had not seen in a long time. He was very still. Like a river, she said, present and moving and not particularly interested in whether I am watching or not, just there. The lamp flickered very slightly, the way lamps did when the oil shifted. I am not going to rush you, he said. You have told me everything I need to know for now. The rest is yours to manage at whatever pace feels honest. And if honest is slow? She said. I have been slow for 12 years, he said, waiting for the mark to appear. Slow is familiar territory. She looked at him. She thought about the 17-year-old he must have been, young and probably impatient in the way all young people were impatient, waiting for the bond that was supposed to define his adult life, and it not coming for years, and him carrying that the way he had described her carrying the rejection, with understanding and without resolution. 12 years, she said. Since 17, he said. I am 29. She had not known that. The mark appears late for some lines, he said. My father's appeared at 32. That is a very long time to wait for an answer, she said. It is, he agreed, but the answer, when it came, he glanced at his wrist, the branching mark there, was outside a closed door, smelling of river mud, clearly not interested in making anything easy. A pause. I found I did not mind that at all. She looked at him. And then she did something she had not planned and had not decided, and which therefore arrived with the particular cleanness of things that come from somewhere below decision. She reached across the space between their chairs and put her hand briefly over the mark on his wrist, not holding, not gripping, just covering it with her palm for a moment, the way you cover a candle that has been in a draft. She felt the faint warmth of it under her hand, the slight raised edge where the ink-dark mark lived in his skin. She withdrew her hand. Neither of them said anything. The lamp went on burning. Outside, somewhere in the dark beyond the south window, the night was moving through its late stages toward whatever came next. She thought, there is something here. Not a decision, not a conclusion, something earlier than both of those, a direction, the way a compass finds north, not because north is close, but because that is what compasses do when you let them settle. She picked up the book he had set down and turned it to the spine. Second volume. He was further along than she was. I lent Petra my copy, she said. I have not finished it. I can leave this one, he said. You are reading it, she said. I have read it before, he said. She put it back on the side table beside his chair. Finish it first, she said. I know where you will leave it when you are done. She stood up. She went to the door. She stopped, hand on the frame, and looked back at him. The lamplight, the quiet room, the man in the chair who was there and had been there, and apparently intended to keep being there. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She went upstairs. She slept well, for the first time in 2 weeks, the deep and uninterrupted sleep of someone who has said the true thing and found the room still standing after. She woke the next morning to rain. It came in from the west, the way the long rains always came, not dramatically but completely. A steady, thorough, gray-curtained rain that turned the kitchen garden to dark mud and the gravel paths to shallow rivers, and made the inside of the estate feel warmer and more enclosed than usual. She lay for a few minutes listening to it on the window glass, which had always been one of the specific sounds she liked best, and then she got up. The household had the particular indoor quality of a rainy day, quieter, closer, the sounds of it concentrated by the fact that no one was outside scattering them. She could hear Nell in the kitchen, and her mother's footsteps in the corridor overhead, and, faintly, the sound of the stable yard grooms dealing with horses that did not want to come in from their stalls. She went to the library for the book and found, as she had somehow expected, that it was on the side table nearest the door, closed, finished, a small dried fig leaf marking the last page. She had seen him picking up the fallen leaves in the garden sometimes, the way people picked up small things they liked without quite deciding to. She took the book. She held the fig leaf carefully, put it back where it had been, and carried the volume to her favorite chair by the south window, where the rain made the glass go gray and flowing. She did not open it immediately. She sat with it in her lap and looked at the rain and thought about the night before, the 20 minutes of telling, and how it had felt to have the room stay standing afterward. She had been afraid, she understood now, that speaking it would make it larger, that saying the story out loud would give it more substance, sharpen its edges, make the parts that had blurred through 4 years go detailed and present again. It had done the opposite. Saying it had put it in the past tense, not gone, not irrelevant, but past, dated, located in time, belonging to a version of her that was younger, and did not yet know some things that she knew now. The 22-year-old in this chair, reading in the rain, was not the same as the 18-year-old in a yellow dress, and she had known that in a general way, but something about saying the story to someone who listened to it as story, as a thing that had happened, with a before and an after, made the gap between them feel real for the first time. She had a past. It was hers. She could hold it without it holding her. She opened the book. She read through the morning. At midday, Calum appeared in the doorway, which she noticed without looking up was something he always did, appeared in doorways, and waited to be acknowledged, rather than coming in, as if the room were already his. "There is a fire in the east sitting room," he said. "Nell has made something with the last of the pears." She marked her page. "You are recommending I stop reading to eat pears." "Nell is recommending it," he said. "I am relaying the recommendation." She closed the book. "Is it good?" "The pears? I have not had any yet." "Nell is very particular about sequence." She went with him to the east sitting room, where the fire was burning well, and the rain was loud against the windows, and Nell had, in fact, made a pear thing of some description, that was warm and sweet, and required everyone present to sit still long enough to eat it properly. Her mother was there, and 2 of her father's men who had been waiting out the rain before riding back to the north boundary, and they all sat around the fire in the easy way. People sat around fires in bad weather, taking the warmth as permission to not be anywhere else for a while. She ate the pears. She looked at the rain. She looked, once, sideways at Calum, where he sat on the other side of the fire with his own cup, and found that he had been looking in a different direction, but turned slightly when she looked, the way people did when they felt attention without seeing it. He looked at her. She looked back. Her mother, who was a woman who did not miss things, looked at something extremely interesting in the middle distance, and said nothing. The fire burned. The rain came down. It was, as afternoons went, a very good one. Later that evening, after dinner, she found herself in the small garden room where her mother kept the plants that needed shelter in the colder seasons, an odd assortment of them in clay pots on stone shelves, most of them her mother's, and some of them Leora's, from experiments she had tried over the years. It was a narrow room, with glass on 3 sides, and it always smelled of damp earth and green growing things, which was the smell she associated more than any other with the interior of this house. She was watering the tall herb pots when she heard him come in through the far door. "I thought you would be here," he said. "Where else?" she said. He came and stood beside her at the shelf, looking at the row of pots. He reached out and touched the edge of one leaf, the large flat mint, very gently, just the tip of one finger. "What is this one?" he said. "River mint," she said. "Grows along the Kern. I brought a cutting back 3 years ago." She paused. It took a long time to settle. He looked at the plant. It was full and green, and clearly healthy, rooted deeply into its pot. with the confident appearance of something that had decided this was home. "But it's settled," he said. "It's settled," she confirmed. He looked at her. She looked at the mint. Then she looked at him. "I am settling," she said. It was not a decision or a declaration. It was just an accurate description of what was happening, offered plainly, because the truth of it was there, and it seemed worth saying. He did not make it larger than she had made it. "I know," he said. "It may still be slow," she said. "I know," he said. She went back to the watering. He stayed. The rain went on outside the glass walls, soft and persistent, and the plants were green in the lamplight, and the earth smelled like itself, and the evening moved toward night the way evenings did, gradually, without permission, carrying everything inside it forward. She thought, "I am settling." She held the thought the way you hold water in your hands, carefully, and with the full understanding that it will not stay forever, but for right now it is there, and it is cool, and real, and enough. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. On the 14th day, the herald brought news from the capital. Caleb read it in the east sitting room, with the same still expression he brought to everything, and then he folded the letter and put it on the table beside his cup, and Leora, who had been on the other side of the room pretending to read her own book, while actually monitoring his reaction, with the focused attention of someone who had spent 2 weeks learning to read a new face, waited. "The council has questions," he said. "About the selection," she said. "Not a question." "About my continued absence from the capital," he said. "And about the absence of a chosen mate." He looked at the letter. "There are, as I mentioned to you, real consequences attached to a selection that ends without a result. The council is concerned." "What kind of concerned?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to say. She had noticed this in him, the consideration between what he knew and what he shared, the internal check of fairness and usefulness that he applied before most important statements. She had come to trust it. "The formal kind," he said. "They have asked me to return to the capital within a fortnight to discuss the matter at court. There is also," he paused again, "there is a suggestion that a second selection might be called, in the Eastern Territories this time, to expand the pool." She looked at him. She said, "A second selection." "A suggestion," he said, "not a requirement. The council can advise, but cannot compel a king on the matter of his fated bond." She looked at the book in her lap, which was a history she was not reading, and thought about what a second selection meant. It meant other women. It meant the council's version of efficiency, the logical next step when the first attempt had not produced the expected outcome. It meant treating the whole situation as a problem to be solved by expanding the available inputs. She knew, rationally, that the bond did not work that way. A second selection with 100 women would not change where the mark on his wrist pointed, because the bond did not make choices between available options. It pointed where it pointed. She knew this. She still felt the cold edge of it. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I am going to write back," he said, "and tell them I will return to the capital when I am ready, and that the matter of the selection is not a council matter. They may not accept that. They will not like it," he corrected. "There is a difference." He looked at her with the calm certainty that lived in everything he did. "I did not say it would be without cost. I said it was not their decision." She put her book down. She looked at the letter on the table, the crisp official paper of it, the seal broken at the corner. "They do not know I exist," she said. "The council. You have not told them." "I told my herald," he said, "who is discreet. I have not made any formal notification." "Why not?" He considered this. "Because your life here would change the moment it became official," he said, "and I was not willing to change your life without your consent, not that way." She stared at him. She had not, she realized, thought about what official meant. She had been living inside the strangeness of this, the estate, the walks, the library evenings, the slow and genuine thing that was happening between them, as if it existed in a separate space from the world that contained councils and formal courts, and the press of a kingdom's requirements. She had been here, in this house, in these ordinary days, and she had not thought hard about what came after. "If you tell them," she said, "what happens?" "You would be publicly acknowledged as the king's fated mate," he said. There would be formal processes, an introduction at court, a period of preparation, eventually a ceremony. He said it without making any of it sound unavoidable, but it was unavoidable, and they both knew it. Your life here would become more complicated. There would be people with opinions. There would be obligations that do not currently exist. She thought about the life she had built, or perhaps the life she had reduced herself to, which was different from building but had a similar quality of careful design. The estate, the herbs, the library, the channel path behind the old irrigation ditch, old Bren and Nell and Petra and the cook who noticed when she was humming. She thought about what she had begun to feel in the past 2 weeks, the slight expansion, the breathing room, the sense of being full-sized in her own life again. She thought about a court and a king, and a world that was larger and louder than a minor pack estate in the Western Territory. I need to think, she said. Take whatever time you need, he said. That is always what you say, she said. That is always what I mean, he said. She stood up. She went to the window. Outside, the morning was clear and cold, the sky a pale winter blue that meant the warmth was leaving and the real season was coming. The fig tree in the east garden was half bare now, the last of its leaves turning gold at the edges. May I ask you something I should probably have asked sooner, she said. Yes. Do you want this? She turned from the window. Not the bond. I know the bond exists. I know it points. I mean, do you want the person it is pointing at? Because those are different questions. You can be certain of one and not yet sure about the other. He looked at her across the room. I have been here for 2 weeks, he said. I have run the same path every morning, and read the same history every afternoon, and eaten Nell's cooking every day. I have watched you carry cups when you are thinking, and take on the kitchen garden as a physical project when you need to use your body to calm your mind. I have watched you be kind to your sister in circumstances that required something more complicated than simple kindness. I have watched you tell the truth about yourself in a room with a lamp burning low, and I have watched you look at a mark on my wrist like it was something you recognized. He paused. Yes, he said. I want the person. She looked at him for a long time. She thought, I believe him. She had been testing that, in the careful and unconscious way you tested things you were afraid to trust, watching for the crack in the consistency, the moment where the behavior stopped matching the words. It had not appeared. She believed him. All right, she said. I need to think about the council and the court and what comes next. I need a few days. Take them, he said. She nodded. She walked to the door. At the door she stopped, the way she had been doing, because she kept finding things she wanted to say when she was in the act of leaving, as if the nearness of a threshold made her more honest, or as if saying something and then having an exit already arranged made it feel safer. For what it's worth, she said, without looking back, I want the person too. She went through the door before she could see his expression, but she heard, faintly, in the east sitting room, the specific sound a person made when they exhaled something they had been holding for a long time. She counted to herself as she walked the corridor. She got to 11 before she smiled. The next 3 days were the strangest kind of busy, the kind where the external life of the house went on in its ordinary way, and the ordinary things required attention, and she gave that attention fully, and meanwhile something else was happening underneath all of it that was not ordinary at all. She cut herbs. She helped Nell with the autumn preserving. She sat with her father over the estate accounts and pointed out the error in the northern column that he had been missing for 2 weeks, which made him pleased and slightly embarrassed in equal measure. She walked the channel path twice, once alone in the early morning, and once with Petra, who was staying for a few more days, and who was, Leora was becoming aware, conducting a research project on Calum that expressed itself as a series of very casual questions that were not casual. He seems quiet, Petra said, on the second walk. He is, Leora said. Not the bad kind of quiet, Petra clarified. Not the kind where you find out later they were thinking something terrible. The kind where they are thinking something useful and waiting until it is ready. That is an accurate observation, Leora said. I like him, Petra said. You do not know him. I know enough, Petra said. I know the way he watched you across the gathering room. I know the way he held the gate when you were carrying the herb basket, even though you did not need him to. I know that he walks the estate path every morning, but he slows down when he passes the kitchen garden, which is where you are in the mornings. Leora looked at the channel bank. He slows down at the kitchen garden, she said. Every time, Petra said. I asked Owen. She thought about someone slowing down at the kitchen garden every morning, not stopping, not announcing himself, just slowing, the way you slowed when you passed something that mattered. Petra, she said. Yes? You should probably stop asking Owen things. Probably, Petra agreed. I am going to continue anyway. Leora sighed, and then she smiled, and then she let herself feel the full warmth of having a person who was on your side, so thoroughly, that they went and asked the stable hand questions on your behalf, without being asked to. Thank you, she said. What for? Petra said. Being here, she said. Petra looked at her sideways with the expression of someone who is genuinely moved, and is not going to make it sentimental. I have always been here, she said. You just stopped telling me things for a while. I am going to start again, Leora said. I know, Petra said. I can tell. They walked back in the late morning light, the channel dry and pale beside them and the estate ahead, solid and real, and full of all the things that made it home, the kitchen smells, and the creak of the east door, and the fig tree going bare in the garden, and the man in the gray coat who slowed down at the kitchen garden in the mornings. She had a decision to make. She made it on the third evening. She found him where she had found him on that first night she could not sleep, in the library, lamp burning low, the sound of the house settling around them. But this time she had not come, because she could not sleep. She had come, because she was ready. She sat in her chair and looked at him across the lamp. Right back to the council, she said. He was very still. Tell them what, he said. Tell them that you have found 44, she said. Tell them whatever the formal language is. Tell them you will return to the capital at the appropriate time, and that you will bring her with you. She paused. Tell them her name is Leora Vane, and she is 22 years old, and she faked a fever to skip the selection, and she would like it on record that she has significant reservations about court life, but is willing to learn. He looked at her. The council will not appreciate the last part, he said. I know, she said. Include it anyway. Something moved in his face, the corner of his mouth, and his eyes, and a quality of warmth that she had not seen at full brightness before, which was different from the gentle, steady warmth she had seen all along. This was something released. I will write it tonight, he said. Good, she said. She picked up the book she had been reading for 3 days, and found her page and read for a while, and he picked up his own book, and the lamp burned on, and the library was quiet and warm, and outside the estate the night was doing its slow, ordinary turning toward morning. She thought, I chose this. Not the bond, not the fated mark. Those had existed outside her choosing. But this, the room, the light, the man across the lamp, the decision she had arrived at in 3 days, of carrying herbs and walking, and letting herself be at full size. This she had chosen. That felt important. She held it as she read, and when she looked up once to find him looking at her, she did not look away. She was not afraid of being seen. Not anymore. The letter went with the morning rider the next day. Leora was in the kitchen garden when the rider left. She heard the gate and the sound of hooves on the drive, quick and purposeful, and she looked up from the bed she was weeding, and watched the gate swing closed behind whoever had gone, and thought, that is it. That is the moment before everything changes shape. She was not afraid of it. She went back to the weeding. Old Bren came to the estate that afternoon, which he did periodically, when his rounds of the outer pack households brought him through this direction, and he came into the kitchen garden where Leora was finishing up, and stood looking at her with the expression he had used when she was 7, and had eaten the wrong berry on a dare, and he had been called to assess the damage. You look better, he said. I was not unwell, she said. He said, which was his version of yes and no, and several other things simultaneously. He looked at the garden beds, the ordered rows of herbs, the dark soil turned and clean. Interesting things happening in this estate. You could say that, she said. I have seen bonds appear before, he said. He said it to the garden, not to her, in the musing way of old men who have witnessed many things, and allowed themselves the luxury of comment, now that the urgency of most situations had passed them by. 3 times, in my career, 2 went well immediately. 1 took a long time. He paused. The long one was the best marriage I ever witnessed. They had 31 years. Leora was quiet. The slow ones are the real ones, old Bren said. The ones that come together properly, with full understanding. He glanced at her. My professional opinion, for whatever it is worth. Your professional opinion is in considerable demand, she said. As it should be, he said, without modesty, because modesty had never been one of his primary features. He went in to speak to her mother, and she stayed in the garden for a while longer, looking at the beds she had tended for years, the rosemary and mint, and the pale numbing flowers and all the rest of it, growing in the ordered way of things that had been given the right conditions and left to do what they did. She thought about 31 years. She thought about that without the old tightening, the reflexive contraction of want that has been disappointed, into something too small to be hurt again. She thought about it openly, with the full size she had been practicing. She thought, 31 years would be a very long time to know someone. She thought, I would like that. Not as a resolution or a certainty, just as an honest preference, stated plainly to herself in a kitchen garden in the afternoon, with dirt on her hands and the smell of rosemary in the air. I would like that. It was enough to be going on with. The response from the council came faster than expected. 4 days, the express rider, the official seal on the letter pressed hard enough that it had left an impression in the paper. Caleb brought it to her himself rather than having the herald deliver it, which she noticed was a deliberate choice. She read it standing at the window in the east sitting room, the pale light falling across the formal language of men who had managed a kingdom for a long time and had decided opinions about how things should be done. The council was, to put it mildly, not thrilled. The letter was politely worded in the way of men who knew better than to be impolite to their king, but the polite words were doing a great deal of work to cover a great deal of concern. There were phrases about the appropriate timeline for formal introduction, and about the importance of the court's assessment of the mate candidate, and about certain traditions regarding the public announcement of the fated bond that the council felt strongly should be observed in the proper order. She looked at Caleb. They want to vet me. They want to meet you, he said. The distinction matters to them. What is the distinction in practice? They believe the distinction is everything, he said. In practice, the distinction is somewhat narrower. He paused. They cannot reject the fated bond. The bond is not subject to council approval, but they can make the process of formal acknowledgement more or less comfortable, and their letter suggests they intend to exercise that discretion. They are going to be difficult, she said. Some of them, he said. Some will be fair. Some will be genuinely kind. Some will be political. She looked back at the letter. Which ones will be which? Lord Bain, the head of council, is political but fair. Lady Corvan, who oversees the social obligations of the court, is kind but exacting. Lord Ferris is difficult in the specific way of a man who has held the same position for 30 years and has come to believe that the position is more important than the person who holds it. He said this last one with the even neutrality of someone who had managed this person for some years and had developed a system for it. He will not be the worst of your problems. He will simply be the most consistent. She set the letter on the table. When do we go? She said. He looked at her. You are certain? I am not certain of the court, she said. I am certain of the direction. Those are different. She said it the way he had said the distinction matters. When do we go? The letter requests our presence within the month, he said. I would like to give you more time here if you want it. She looked at the kitchen garden through the east window, the late autumn beds, the cleared rows, the herb pots on the south wall catching what remained of the season's light. 1 more week, she said. Then we go. He nodded. She picked up the letter and folded it along its original lines and handed it back to him. Their fingers overlapped briefly on the paper. She did not move her hand immediately. He did not either. Then she let go and he took the letter, and they stood in the east sitting room in the ordinary afternoon light of a house that was about to change, and she felt the change coming like weather, not threatening, not exactly, just real, and present, and belonging to a future she was choosing to walk toward. I want to go to the Channel Path this evening, she said, before it gets dark. I know, he said. I will be ready. She went to put on her coat. She thought, 1 more week. She thought, it is enough. She thought, very simply, the way you thought things that were true, it is going to be all right. Not easy, not without cost, not without the complications that came with courts and councils and the public life of a king's mate, not without the continuing work of being full-sized in a world that would sometimes try to make her smaller, not without all of it. But all right. She put her coat on and went out to the garden and stood in the late light, and when he came through the gate to join her, she walked beside him toward the channel without looking back. The estate was behind them. The channel was ahead. The cairn was further still, silver in the distance, moving toward somewhere with the calm certainty of a thing that had always known which way to go. She walked. The capital was loud. Leora had known this academically. Anyone who had not grown up in a city understood cities the way you understood weather in a country you had never visited, from description and logic rather than experience. But the knowledge and the reality were separated by a distance she had not properly calculated, and the moment the carriage passed through the outer gates of the capital, and the sound of it changed, thickened, layered, the particular density of thousands of lives happening simultaneously within walls, she felt the gap close fast. She did not say anything. She watched the city move past the carriage window and organized what she was seeing with the focused attention she had always used for things that required her to learn them quickly. The capital was old. She could feel the age of it in the way the buildings sat, settled into their foundations, not just standing, but leaning slightly forward into their own presence, as if they had had long enough to become certain of their place. The royal district was at the center of it, and as the carriage moved through the outer rings toward the middle, the architecture shifted register. The stones became lighter, the proportions more careful, the kind of building that had been designed rather than simply made. Calum was across from her in the carriage. He had been watching the city too, but with the different quality of a man watching a place that knew him, not studying it, just being present to it. You are quiet, he said. I am thinking, she said. Good thoughts or cautious ones? Both, she said, at the same time. He looked at her with the expression she had by now catalogued completely, the one that had no single word, but whose components she could now name individually. Attention, steadiness, something that was not quite affection, but lived immediately beside it. The council will meet us this afternoon, he said. Not formally, this is a preliminary introduction, an informal gathering in the East reception. The formal presentation is 3 days away. Who will be there this afternoon, she said. Bain, Lady Corvin, probably Ferris, though he may send his secretary as a statement. He paused. My cousin Owen. She looked at him. You have not mentioned a cousin. He is manageable, Calum said, which was a sentence that conveyed a great deal of information by way of what it left out. What kind of manageable, she said. The kind that requires you to understand that he says things without thinking and does not mean most of them personally. He says things without thinking, she said. He is 25, Calum said, as if this fully explained it, and in her experience of men who said things without thinking, it actually did go a considerable way. The carriage passed through the inner gate of the palace district, and the sound of the city went slightly muffled, replaced by the organized quiet of a larger, more controlled space. The clip of the horses on formal stone, rather than packed dirt road, the sound of guards at their posts, the particular hush of a place that took its own dignity seriously. She breathed through it. The East reception room was smaller than she had expected, which she decided was deliberate, a room calculated to be intimidating, through intimacy rather than scale, the way a low ceiling sometimes pressed more than a high one. It had a fireplace that was too large for the room, burning too brightly for the afternoon, and the light it threw made everyone in it look either very warm or slightly feverish, depending on where they were standing. Lord Bain was a broad man in his 60s, with the specific quality of a person who had spent decades managing the distance between what he wanted and what he could actually do, and had become expert enough at it that the management was almost invisible. He bowed correctly, and said the correct things, and looked at her with the assessment he had not quite finished removing from his expression. Lady Corvin was exactly as Calum had described, kind and exacting, both at once, with the precision of someone who genuinely wanted things to go well, and had very definite opinions about what going well required. She took Leora's hand and held it for a moment longer than protocol required, and said, "We are so glad you are here," and Leora believed her, which was not something she had expected to be able to say about anyone in this room. Lord Ferris arrived with a small, controlled expression that suggested he had decided on this expression before entering, and was not prepared to change it. He said the minimum required of him and then stood slightly apart, performing neutrality, with the practiced ease of a man who had decided his feelings about this situation, and considered expressing them openly to be beneath the dignity of his position. The cousin arrived late. He came through the side door with the particular energy of someone who had been moving fast since before the gathering started, and had not quite made the transition to still. He was Calum's age, roughly, or younger, with the same height but differently assembled, less contained, more openly expressive, the kind of face that showed everything as it happened. "Sorry," he said to the room, apparently to everyone at once. "The Western dispatch was late and I was..." "Right." He stopped when he saw Leora. His expression went through several things in quick succession, all of them visible. "Oh," he said. "You are Leora." "I am," she said. "I expected someone more. I mean, I did not expect..." He stopped himself. "You are not what I pictured." "What did you picture?" she said. "Someone who would be more frightened," he said, with the honesty of a person who had run out of ways to soften the truth before reaching it. "Of all this, the court, and everything, most people are, when they first come here." She looked at him. He looked back. "I am somewhat frightened," she said. "I am choosing not to show it." A pause. He grinned. "A real one, uncontrolled, the kind that happened before you decided whether to let it." "I am going to like you," he said. Calum, beside her, made a sound so quiet it barely existed, but she had learned his register well enough to identify it. He was almost laughing. "I do not know yet whether I will like you," she told the cousin, whose name was, apparently, Cole. "I will keep an open mind." "Fair," Cole said, "extremely fair." Lord Ferris, across the room, looked at his cup in the expression of a man recalculating. Lady Corvin, close to Leora's left, squeezed her arm once, very briefly. The afternoon moved forward. Bain asked careful questions about the estate and the Western Territories, which she answered accurately and at the appropriate level of detail. She had prepared for this, knowing that accurate information delivered without performance was a better foundation than charm. Lady Corvin asked about the selection, not accusatorially, just genuinely, as if she wanted to understand the sequence of events. Leora answered that too, including the part where she had not attended, and waited to see what Corvin did with it. Corvin smiled. "A woman who knows her own mind," she said. "We could use more of those." Ferris made a small sound. Nobody addressed it. The gathering ran for about 2 hours. Near the end of it, when the light through the tall windows had gone from afternoon to the first amber of evening, Bain moved to stand beside her in the way of a man who had waited for a moment when he could speak without the full room's attention. "The formal presentation is 3 days hence," he said, quietly. "There will be a larger court gathering. The full council, several of the senior lords, some of the diplomatic representatives." He paused. "I want to say to you, plainly, that the council's concerns about the unconventional nature of this selection are concerns about process and not about person. The bond is not ours to question. Our concern is the management of the announcement, and we will do our part to manage it well if you give us what we need." "What do you need?" she said. "Presence," he said. "Simply that. Be in the room, fully, and let people see you clearly. The court forms its opinions quickly and changes them slowly. The first impression is the one that matters." She thought about being full-sized. "I can manage that," she said. He nodded, and there was something in the nod that was not quite approval. Too early for that, but was the beginning of it. The shape approval made before it arrived. Cole appeared at her elbow as Bain moved away. "He likes you," he said, in a low voice. "He is reserving judgment," she said. "For Bain, that is liking you," Cole said. "You should see him with people he does not like." She thought about the past 2 weeks. About all the rooms she had been in recently that had required her to be present and visible and measured and found, in some way, sufficient. She thought about 14 days on a minor pack estate, eating stew, and reading history, and walking a dry irrigation channel in the early morning. She thought, "I can do this." Not because it was not hard, because the thing she had been carrying, the certainty that rooms like this one were rooms where she would always be invisible, was not a certainty anymore. It was an old story, a past tense thing, located in time, not permanent. She had stood in this room for 2 hours. Nobody had looked through her. She found Calum near the window, as the gathering began to disperse. He looked at her in the fading light, with the expression she knew, and she looked back, and what passed between them was not a conversation, but something that did not need to be. "How are you?" he said. "Tired," she said. "And better than I expected." "Cole made you laugh," he said. "Cole made me almost laugh," she corrected. "I kept it internal." "I saw it," he said. She looked at him. "I am going to need you to stop being able to see things other people cannot see," she said. "It is an inconvenient quality." "I will see what I can do," he said, and his mouth made the small movement she had catalogued as his version of a smile, not the full expression, which she had seen once, in the library, and which had done significant damage to her composure, but the predecessor to it, the almost. She looked at him and thought, "This is what I chose. Not the capital, not the court, not the council, not the formal presentation in 3 days, or the obligations that would follow, or the complicated navigation of a life more public than she had built. Not any of that specifically. Him, the person, the man who had slowed down at the kitchen garden, the one who had said "I will wait" and meant it in more than one direction. The one who, 12 days into knowing her, had listened to the whole of her, without once trying to fix any of it. That was what she had chosen. Everything else was just the shape that choice made when you moved it into the world. She could work with that. She went to find her assigned quarters before dinner, and she walked through the palace corridors with the full measure of herself, taking up all the space she needed, and she let the place be what it was, large and formal and entirely unfamiliar, without making herself smaller to fit it. She was not going to be small again. She had decided. Her quarters were on the 3rd floor of the East Wing, 3 rooms that had been prepared with the careful impersonality of rooms made ready for an important guest, everything clean and correct, and chosen not to offend, which meant chosen not to commit to any particular person. She stood in the center of the main room and looked at the neutral walls and the carefully arranged furniture and thought, "I will need to put something here that is mine." She had brought very little. A small bag of clothes, a few books, the tin of dried herbs she kept in her room at the estate for the specific ones old Bren had taught her were harder to find once winter set in. She took the herb tin out and set it on the mantelpiece. It looked completely out of place among the formal decorations of a palace room, which was exactly what she wanted. She went to the window. The capital at night was its own thing. The lights of it, the sound of it, the continuous, layered, impossible complexity of a city that did not sleep completely. The estate and its surrounding territory was the whole geography of her life, with the occasional visit to the nearest town, and this was nothing like any of that. She should have been terrified. She was not. She was something she did not have an immediate word for. Alert. Present. She was here, and it was large, and it was unfamiliar, and she was not diminished by it. That was new. She went to bed early, because travel was tiring, and she wanted to be rested for the days ahead, and she lay in the unfamiliar room, listening to the city outside the window, and let her thoughts come and go, without forcing them into order. She thought about the estate, about the fig tree going bare in the garden, about the channel path and the kern in the distance, silver and steady, about Nell and Petra, and her mother's way of holding a pen when she was deciding something. She thought about all the versions of herself she had been, the 18-year-old in the yellow dress, the 20-year-old who had started building the wall, the 22-year-old who had brewed marshroot in the kitchen after midnight and decided to be invisible. She thought about the woman who had stepped out of the sick room and walked into the library and told the truth in the lamplight. She thought about the woman who had said, "In a kitchen garden, I am settling." She liked the most recent one best. She slept. The next 2 days before the formal presentation passed in the way of days that contained both a great deal and nothing at all. Meetings and introductions and the careful navigation of a world she was learning by immersion, alongside the stretches of quiet that Calum seemed to instinctively create for her, understanding without being asked, that too much of the former without enough of the latter would flatten her by the end of the week. He walked with her in the mornings. The palace had a garden, formal and symmetrical, entirely unlike the organized wild things of the estate, and they walked the gravel paths before the rest of the court woke up, which she was beginning to understand was his preference in every context. The early hours, the quiet ones, the ones that belonged to nobody's agenda. Cole joined them once, uninvited, materializing from a side gate at a pace that suggested he had been waiting for them. "I have a question," he said, falling into step. "I suspected," Calum said. "For Leora," Cole said. "Not you." He looked at her. "There are 17 women at this court who have been positioning themselves as possible mate candidates for the past 3 years. Not all of them will receive this news well." "Tell me about them," she said. Cole blinked. "You want the list?" "I want to know who they are, what their families are, what they care about, and what I can reasonably offer in the way of acknowledgement that will make this easier for them," she said, "starting with the ones who are likely to be most affected." Cole looked at Calum. "I told you," Calum said mildly. "You told me very little," Cole said. "I was forming my own conclusions." He fell into step properly, matching her pace. "The primary concern is Lady Hester Wynne. Her family has been at this court for 3 generations, and her mother has certain expectations that Lady Hester may or may not share, but that she has never publicly contradicted. And she is someone who wanted this for herself," Leora said, "or someone for whom her family wanted it." Cole considered this with more care than she expected. "Both, I think," he said. "The wanting and the family's wanting have been going on for long enough that she may not be entirely sure where one ends and the other begins." "I understand that," Leora said. "Do you?" Cole said, not skeptically, curiously. "More than I expected to," she said. He nodded slowly, rearranging something in his understanding, with the visible speed of a young man who was quicker than he appeared. "I will put together a proper account," he said. "Of all 17, everything I know." "Thank you," she said. He peeled off at the next fork in the path, going back the way he had come, with the same accelerating energy he had arrived with. She watched him go. "He is going to be useful," she said. "He is," Calum said. "He has always been useful. He has also always been exhausting. Somehow both are equally true." She looked at the formal garden around them, the clipped hedges, the symmetrical beds, the stone paths that did not encourage wandering. "Can we find a place where the garden is less controlled?" she said. "At some point, I do not mind formal spaces, but I would like to know there is somewhere in this city that smells like actual earth." He looked at her. "There is a river garden," he said, "on the east side of the district. It is old, and the groundskeepers have largely left it to its own judgment. It is somewhat unkempt." "Ideal," she said. "I will take you tomorrow," he said. "After the presentation." She nodded. She thought, after the presentation. 3 days had become 2 days had become tomorrow. She was not afraid. She was something she was still learning to name. The thing that came after fear had been acknowledged and put in its place. Not fearlessness, something more honest than that. The willingness to be afraid and go anyway, because the direction was chosen and the person beside her was real, and the life ahead, complicated and large as it was hers. She walked the gravel path of the formal garden in the morning, with the city waking around her, and the river somewhere beyond the walls, moving in the direction it had always moved. And she thought about direction, and she thought about rivers, and she thought about a man who had looked at a closed door and decided to knock. She was glad he had knocked. She was glad she had opened it. Even messy and strategic and terrified, even with marsh root residue on the bedside table, she had opened it. That had mattered. That was, she thought, the most honest thing she knew. The morning of the formal presentation, she woke before the palace woke. The city was still in its deep, pre-dawn state. Not silent, because cities were never silent, but at its most interior, its sounds reduced to the underlying ones, the ones that were always there under the noise of the day. She could hear the river from her window, which she had not expected. It was too distant to see, but present enough to hear, if the air was right. And this morning the air was right, cold and clear, and the sound of it came in through the window she had left open a crack all night, because she slept better with outside air. She lay with that for a while, the river sound. She thought about the cairn behind the estate, and the way she had walked beside it on the morning she had told Calum she was done being small. She thought about rivers in general, the way they moved around things that were in their way, without stopping, and without fighting the obstacle, simply finding the available path and taking it. She got up. She dressed without calling the attendant who had been assigned to her, because she was capable of dressing herself and wanted the private time of the early hour. The formal clothes for the presentation were hanging ready. She had been dressed for court occasions before, in the minor way of pack gatherings, and the palace wardrobe keepers had worked with what she had brought and supplemented it, and the result was something she had examined the night before, with the same careful attention she brought to anything she needed to be ready for. She looked well. She looked, in fact, like herself, which was what she had asked the wardrobe keeper for specifically, and which had required a short conversation and some patience on both sides. She went to the window. The city in the near dark was all rooftops and faint light, the palace grounds below her quiet and arranged, and beyond the walls the sound of the waking river. She thought about the 43 women. Not with guilt exactly. The bond had not pointed at any of them, and her absence from the selection hall had not changed that. But she thought about them with the particular care she had developed over the past weeks, for women who had stood in rooms where something was supposed to happen, and then not happened. She had been that woman. She had been that woman at 18, in yellow, and she understood the particular shape of that experience in a way she had not been able to before she had spoken it aloud, and let it become past tense. She would meet some of them, inevitably. The court was not large enough for 43 women to be fully invisible in it. She would meet Lady Hester Wynne and the 16 others that Cole had listed in his careful, thorough account, delivered to her door the previous afternoon. She would have to be present to them in the same way she was trying to be present to everything now, fully, without the distance she had maintained for 4 years, taking up the space she was entitled to. She was ready for that. The knock at her door was Calum, which she had somehow known it would be. He did not come in. He stood in the doorway, dressed already, in the gray and silver of his formal house colors, and he looked at her in the early light, with the expression she now knew was his version of checking on someone, when he was not going to ask how they were. "You are awake," he said. "I slept well," she said. "Better than expected." "Good." He looked at her for a moment. "How do you feel?" "Certain," she said. It was the most accurate word she had. Not comfortable, not easy. Certain, the way North felt when the compass finally settled. He nodded. "We have an hour before the formal gathering begins," he said. "Would you like to walk?" She took her coat from the chair by the door and put it on. They went down through the palace in the early quiet of it, past the guards who nodded at the king and looked at her with the particular calibrated expression of people who had been told to be neutral, and were doing it consciously, and out into the formal garden, where the paths were still dark with night damp, and the hedges held the last of the morning mist in their clipped surfaces. They walked without talking for a while. The gravel path curved and she followed it, and he followed beside her, the same way he had always walked beside her, adjusting without appearing to, present without pressing. "Tell me something about the court," she said, "something that is not in the official briefings." He thought about it. "The best room in the palace," he said, "is the one at the very top of the North Tower. No one uses it officially. It has 9 windows, and you can see the river, and the old road, and on very clear days, the mountains at the eastern edge of the territory." He paused. "I went there sometimes when I was a boy, when the court was very busy, and I needed to remember that the world was larger than the corridor." She looked at him. "Do you still go?" "Not enough," he said. "We should go," she said. "After today," he said. "After today." There was a weight to that, the acknowledgement that today was a threshold, and everything that came before it had a different quality than everything that came after, and they were both aware of the difference. "I am not nervous," she said, which was true in the way that things could be true without being the whole truth. "I know," he said. "I am aware," she said, "of what it means. Today, the people in that room." "Yes. I have been invisible for a long time," she said, "by choice. And today I am going to be the opposite of that, in a room full of people who have opinions, and who have been waiting for this for longer than I have." "Yes," he said. "And I am choosing that," she said. "Not because I have to, because I have decided to." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He turned to look at her and she turned to look at him, and in the early morning light with the mist still on the garden, and the city beginning to make its first sounds, and the river somewhere beyond the walls moving in the direction it had always moved, she looked at him, and he looked back, and the thing between them that had been building for 3 weeks in walks and library evenings and kitchen garden mornings was fully present in both directions, and neither of them performed anything. "I know you are choosing it," he said. "That matters more than you know." She held his gaze. She thought about the tincture, and the closed door, and the 3 words through it. She thought about the crack in the wall, and the 20 minutes in the lamplight, and the morning beside the marsh route, and all the distance between the woman who had lain in a bed with a strategic fever, and the woman standing here now, in a palace garden, deciding to be visible. "It matters to me too," she said. They walked back to the palace, as the morning properly opened. The formal gathering was in the great hall, a room she had been shown the day before, briefly, as part of the orientation to the palace's public spaces. She had walked through it and assessed it the way she assessed everything. It was large and high-ceilinged and formal, and had a particular acoustics that would make every entrance feel significant, whether you intended it to or not. She intended it to. Lord Bain had spent 3 days preparing the introduction. Lady Corvin had overseen the formal arrangement of the gathering, the positions of people and their significance, the choreography of a moment that was both ceremony and first impression. Cole had spent the same time doing something that turned out to be equally valuable, moving quietly through the court and talking to people, and making the conversations that ensured that by the time Leora arrived in that hall, the people in it had had time to adjust their expectations from surprise toward something more considered. She heard later that he had done this effectively, which did not surprise her. She walked into the great hall beside Calum, and the room did the thing she had known it would do. It went still, and then it moved, the wave of recognition that rippled through a court when it was looking at something that mattered. She walked through it, not performing it, not managing it, just walking, at full size, in the direction she had decided to go, and letting the room be a room with people in it who were seeing her for the first time. Bain spoke the formal words, the introduction, the acknowledgement of the bond, the history and the ceremony of it rendered in the official language that courts maintained for occasions of significance. She stood through it and listened and let it be what it was, the public naming of a thing that had begun privately, in a sick room, with river mud and marsh root and a king who had decided to knock. When Bain finished, the room was required to respond. It did. Not with the unanimous warmth she would not have believed anyway, but with the genuine mixed response of people who were encountering something they had not expected and were deciding how to feel about it in real time. Some faces were open and welcoming. Some were careful and assessing. Some, Ferris among them, she noted, were neutral with effort. Lady Hester Wynne was in the 3rd row, in a pale dress, with an expression that cost her something to maintain. Leora found her eyes and held them for a moment, not challenging, not apologetic, just present, seeing her. Hester's expression shifted slightly, something briefly unguarded in it. Leora looked away. She stood in the great hall of the Capitol Palace, and was seen. She did not diminish herself to be seen more easily. She did not look for the exit. She stood there, full size, and let it happen, and discovered something she had not known she needed to discover. That being seen by a room full of people was not the same as the single, directed visibility of a selection, where one person looked and made one decision. This was a different kind of looking, wider, more general, less personal. She could handle wide. She had been afraid of targeted. She had been afraid of standing in a specific person's evaluation, in the specific register of chosen or not. This was not that. This was a room of people forming general impressions, which was a different negotiation entirely, and one she was better equipped for than she had thought. She breathed. She was there. After the formal portion came the reception, the part where the ceremony became human again, where the official distance collapsed into the ordinary proximity of people talking to each other. Cole appeared at her side within 3 minutes, which was the most efficient deployment of a cousin she had ever witnessed. "You were excellent," he said. "I was present," she corrected. "That is the same thing today," he said. "I mean it as the highest possible compliment." She believed him. Lady Corvin found her next, and was warm and specific in the way Leora was learning was genuine. The details she noticed, the observation that Leora had looked at Hester Wynne directly, the appreciation for what that had cost, and what it had signaled. "It was the right thing," Corvin said. "She will not forget it." "I hope she is all right," Leora said. Corvan looked at her. "I think she will be," she said. "She is a practical woman underneath the expectations her family has been building for her. She will find her own direction, given room." "Good," Leora said, and meant it. Bane came to her last, near the end of the reception, with the expression of a man who had arrived at a conclusion and was prepared to share it. "You will do," he said. She looked at him. High praise. The corner of his mouth moved. "From me," he said. "It is." She accepted it. Later, when the reception had ended and the great hall was slowly emptying of its people and the evening was moving toward night, she stood near the window at the far end and looked at the city beyond the glass. Calum stood beside her. They were quiet for a while. "The North Tower," she said. "You said on very clear days you can see the mountains." "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She looked at the city. The thousands of lights of it, the continuous moving life of it, the particular sound it made at this hour, lower, richer, the sound of a place that was settling but not stopping. She thought about the word home. She thought about how it was not a place exactly. Not the estate, though she loved it. Not this palace, though she was learning it. Something in the quality of being known, of being present to someone who was present back. She thought about a dry irrigation channel and a fig tree, and a man who had slowed down at the kitchen garden every single morning for 2 weeks. She thought, wherever that is it. She was not afraid. She was certain. She was there. 3 days after the formal presentation, she found the river garden. She had looked for it the morning after she and Calum had walked the formal paths, following directions he had given her that turned out to be directions shaped by a boy's memory rather than an adult's knowledge of the grounds. She had to backtrack twice and ask a guard who looked surprised to be consulted on the topic, but was ultimately helpful. The river garden was at the eastern edge of the palace grounds, where the formal district met the outer walls of the city, and it had been left largely to itself for long enough that it had developed the particular character of neglected space that has found its own arrangement. The paths were there, but soft with moss. The plantings had moved outside their original borders and combined themselves according to their own judgment, which it turned out had been fairly good. There was a bench near the center that had gone slightly gray with age and was covered with the early signs of the lichen that grew on stone that was left alone in damp air. She sat on the bench. She breathed. The smell of it was the thing she had needed. Earth and moss and the cold mineral freshness of water close by. The smell of things growing without being told how. She sat in the middle of it and let the city be what it was around her, and let this small pocket of uncontrolled life be what it was too, and found that both could be true at the same time. Cole found her there an hour later. She had begun to understand that Cole found people. It was his primary skill, deployed continuously. He always knew where the person he was looking for would be, which suggested he had thought about where they would go before going himself. She was, she suspected, becoming a study for him, her patterns and preferences assembled in his head, with the same methodical care she brought to her own assessments. She was not bothered by it. He sat on the other end of the bench without asking, and looked at the untidy garden with what she recognized, after a moment, as genuine appreciation. "I did not know this was here," he said. "Most people don't," she said. "The guard had to tell me." "Which guard?" "The one at the east corner of the secondary wall. Tall, gray beard." "Old Aldous," Cole said. "He has been at that post for 20 years. He knows everything. Everyone ignores him." She thought about the people who knew things and were ignored. She thought about how much got missed by assuming that significance lived in obvious places. "Tell me something else I should know," she said, "about the court." Cole thought about it with the genuine engagement of someone who enjoyed this kind of question. "There is a faction among the junior lords," he said, "who have been watching how the king manages the council for 3 years, and have concluded, wrongly, that he is manageable. They believe they see a pattern, that he defers on certain things, and therefore can be pushed on others." "No," Cole said, very simply, "but they won't know that until they try it. and they will try it on something that matters, and it will not go the way they expect. She thought about Calum, about the 12 days in a minor pack estate, the patience of it, the complete absence of performance. About the way he had not called a second selection when he could have. About the way he had said, "I told the council this is not their decision," with the calm certainty of a man who knew the difference between the boundary of his authority and the boundary of his willingness. "He is not manageable," she confirmed. "No," Cole said. "He is genuinely patient, right up until the moment he isn't, and the moment he isn't is unambiguous." He paused. "It has happened twice in my memory. Both times were very quiet. Both times were final." She filed this away. "Thank you," she said. "That is the second time you have thanked me," he said. "People at court do not generally thank me. They take the information and move on." "I mean it when I say it," she said. He looked at her. He had the wide, open face of a young man who had been at court long enough to have learned to protect his expressions in some contexts, but had evidently decided this was not one of those contexts. "I want to say something," he said. "I want to say it carefully, because I have a history of saying things incorrectly through not being careful, but I want to say it." "Say it," she said. "I have watched this court for years," he said. "I have watched people come and go, and some of them were good, and some were not, and most of them were complicated. I have watched my cousin since he was 22, and I was 18, and trying to understand what kind of man he was going to be." He paused. I did not know what would settle him. I could see that he was not settled in the way that a person who knows their own life is settled. He was complete in himself, but pointed, like a compass that knows north exists but cannot find it. She was quiet. "I watched him in that hall on selection day," Cole said, "through the side gallery. I watched him walk among the 43 and feel nothing. And I thought, maybe it simply does not come to everyone. Maybe some people are outside the mechanism." He looked at his hands, and then he turned toward a corridor, and I watched his entire body change in a way I had never seen before, and have not seen since. She said nothing. He was not going to stop, Cole said. Whatever was in that corridor, he was not going to walk away from it. He looked at her. "I have been glad of that, every day since." She breathed carefully. "Thank you," she said. It came out slightly more genuine than the previous two, which she had not planned. "You are welcome," he said. They sat in the river garden for a while longer, the moss-soft bench and the unkempt plantings, and the sound of actual water somewhere very close, and the city moving on with its noise, and its life outside the walls, and she thought about what Cole had said, and let it be what it was. A compass that knows north exists, but cannot find it. She thought about the years between 17 and 29, 12 years of waiting for the mark to appear, of walking through life with the knowledge of what was coming, and the absence of it. She had thought about that from her own angle, from the angle of the woman who had been hurt and had rebuilt herself into something careful. She had not spent as much time thinking about his angle, the long approach of something he could not find, until a corridor, until river mud and old leaves, until a knock on a closed door. She stood up from the bench and brushed the moss dust from her coat and looked at the garden around her, the overgrown, self-decided, entirely individual small territory of it. "I am going to have this garden properly cleaned," she said. Cole looked at her. "Not formally," she clarified. "Not into the other one, but cared for, given attention, cleared of the things that are genuinely dead, and given room for the things that are genuinely growing." She looked at the bench, and a new bench. "That is an interesting first act," Cole said. "I need a place that smells like earth," she said simply. He nodded, as if this made complete sense, which she appreciated. She walked back through the palace with Cole, and they talked about the council and the junior lords and the upcoming winter ceremony that would require her involvement, and the particular dynamics of Lady Corvin's office that it was useful to understand. She listened and asked questions and filed things and began to understand, in the practical way of someone who had always learned by engagement rather than preparation, the shape of the life she was entering. It was large. It was complicated. It was full of people with competing interests and long histories, and genuine needs, and occasional bad faith. It was, she thought, actually quite interesting. She found Calum in the East Wing corridor at the end of the afternoon, and they walked together to the North Tower without discussing it. She simply moved in that direction, and he matched her pace, and they climbed the stairs to the room at the top with 9 windows. It was exactly as he had described. She stood at the central window and saw the river and the old road, and, at the far edge, just visible in the clear late afternoon light, the blue suggestion of mountains. "There they are," she said. "There they are," he said behind her. She looked at the mountains for a long time. She thought about the Channel Path and the Kern and the estate and the herb garden and everything that had made her who she was. She held it all without letting any of it go. The past and the present and the direction ahead, all of it together, all of it hers. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the expression she had been learning the components of since a morning 3 weeks ago when she had found him in a kitchen garden and tried to manage the encounter, and found she could not. She had stopped trying to manage it. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I am glad I drank the tincture," she said. "Not because faking a fever was the right choice. It was a coward's choice, and I know that, and I am not proud of it." She paused. "But it produced this, whatever this is, the 2 weeks on the estate, and the walks, and the library, the way we learned each other sideways rather than straight on." She looked at the windows, at the light through them. "I think if I had stood in that hall in the formal line, I would have managed you. I am very good at managing. I would have been polite and correct and kept the distance I had been keeping for 4 years, and you would have had the ceremony and the bond and the mark on your wrist, and I would have given you everything, except the actual truth of me." He was very still. "Instead," she said, "you came to a sick room, you knocked on a closed door, and everything that happened after was honest, from the beginning." "Yes," he said. "I wanted you to know I understand that," she said. "What it gave us, the strange way we started." He crossed the room. Not dramatically, just the same way he did everything, directly, without performance, because the direction was clear, and the person he was walking toward was real. He stood in front of her and looked at her, and said, quietly, "I knocked because I had to. Whatever was behind that door was north. I was not going to face the wrong way." She looked at him. She thought about compasses and rivers, and the things that kept moving in the direction they were built to move. She put her hand in his. He held it. Outside the 9 windows, the mountains were blue at the edge of the world, and the river was silver below, and the city was doing what cities do. Moving. Always moving. Carrying everything inside it forward. She held his hand in the North Tower room. She did not look for an exit. She was exactly where she had decided to be. A month into the capital, she started leaving her window open at night. This was a small thing. The palace was warm and the windows were tall and designed to be closed for the winter, and the attendants who came to turn down her room in the evenings consistently closed them again, which meant she consistently reopened them when they were gone, which meant the next evening they were closed again, and so on, in the gentle, ongoing negotiation of a person who needed outside air to sleep properly, and a palace staff who had decided outside air was not what the room required. She left a note on the window latch, "Please leave as found." It took 3 days, but it worked. Cole, when she told him this, laughed with the full laugh she had now seen a dozen times, and still found slightly startling in its completeness. "You wrote them a note," he said. "It was more efficient than having the conversation repeatedly," she said. "You are going to be very effective at this," he said. And he meant the court and the palace and the whole complicated business of being where she was. And she heard him mean it, and she believed him. She was learning the court the way she had learned everything useful in her life, by paying attention to what was actually there, rather than what she had expected to find. The actual thing turned out to be substantially more interesting than the version she had feared. There were people in the court who were genuinely good at their work, and found that work meaningful. There was Lady Corvin, who managed the social obligations of the royal house with the same precise warmth that had initially surprised her, and continued to reveal new applications. She was, it turned out, also a skilled mediator, and had a particular capacity for placing the right 2 people in conversation at the right moment, and letting the conversation do its own work. There was Bain, who was political in the way of a man who had spent 30 years making difficult things workable, and had a genuine investment in the health of the kingdom, rather than simply his own position within it. There was Aldous the guard at the east corner of the secondary wall, who knew the name and history of every person who had passed through his post, and who had, Leora had discovered an encyclopedic knowledge of the palace's less official spaces and passages, which she was systematically exploring. There were also, as promised, the complications. Lord Ferris remained consistently difficult in the way Cole had predicted. Not personally hostile, which would have been easier to address, but consistently invested in process over substance, which meant that every time something new needed to happen, he had extensive opinions about the appropriate sequence. She had developed a technique for him. She let him finish expressing the sequence. She agreed with the parts she could agree with, and she moved forward on what was actually necessary. He did not like this, but also could not quite argue with it, which she had concluded was the best available outcome. The junior lords who believed Calum was manageable had, in the weeks since the formal presentation, conducted 2 tests of this hypothesis. Both had been, as Cole had predicted, final and quiet. She had not been present for either, but had been briefed afterward, and what she understood from the briefings was that Calum's version of authority was the kind that did not announce itself before it arrived, and was unmistakable once it did. She had thought about how this squared with the man who had sat under a fig tree for 2 weeks eating Nell's stew. It squared perfectly. The patience was not the same as the absence of a center. The gentleness was not the same as flexibility on the things that mattered. A river was gentle, and it was also the thing that had carved the canyon it ran through, and those were not contradictory qualities. Lady Hester Wynne had come to speak to her in the 3rd week. Leora had known it was coming, had felt the approach of it the way you felt weather, in the small signals that preceded the event. She had prepared for it, not by planning what to say, but by being clear with herself about what she meant, so that when the words needed to come, they came from somewhere real. Hester had found her in the river garden, which was not a coincidence. Leora had made no secret of spending time there, and anyone who wanted to find her and did not want an audience knew where to look. She had come alone, which Leora respected. "I wanted to speak to you before the winter ceremony," Hester had said. She was composed in the way of someone who was made of better material than what she was managing, and who knew it, and was choosing to use the better material today. "I am glad you came," Leora said. The conversation had been 20 minutes, and had covered a range of things that neither of them would have chosen to address in a public setting, and that both of them needed, in some form, to say. Leora had said that she understood what it was to stand in a room and have things go differently than you had prepared for, and that she meant this specifically, and not as a platitude. Hester had said that her family's expectations were not exactly her own, which she had apparently not said out loud to anyone before, and which landed between them with the particular weight of a truth that was overdue. They had not become friends in 20 minutes in a river garden. That was not what the conversation was. But something had been acknowledged, and acknowledgement was a beginning, and beginnings were what they were. Winter came properly in the 5th week. She had not expected to like the capital in winter, but she found she did. The city had a different quality in the cold, more interior, more collective, the way cold weather always organized people's attention around what was warm and near. The palace was full of fires, and the smell of whatever Calum's kitchen preferred for the cold season, and the particular sounds of a large household settling into the indoor version of itself. She worked in her own wing's study in the mornings. She had established a study, claimed the smaller of the 2 rooms in her quarters, and put her herb tin on the desk, and her books in the bookcase, and a cutting of river mint in a pot on the windowsill, and it had become, in the efficient way she found things becoming what they were, hers. She worked on the things that were her work, the social correspondence that Lady Corvin was teaching her the forms of, the accounts of the Western territories that she had asked to be involved in reviewing, because she knew them, and they were not being reviewed by anyone with that knowledge. The ongoing project of the river garden, which was progressing slowly, and had recently produced its first obvious success, in the form of a cleared central path, and 3 genuinely healthy plants, that had been hidden under the encroachment of less determined ones. She worked in the afternoons on the things that were everyone's work, and that she was beginning to understand were hers to do in her own way. The people in the court, the conversations, the careful presence in rooms that shaped how things were understood. She was discovering, better at this than she had expected. Not in the performed, careful way of someone managing a space. In the real way, the way of someone who was genuinely interested in people, and paid genuine attention, and found, consistently, that people responded to being genuinely attended to. Lady Corvin had said, in their 4th week of working together, "You are a natural at this." Leora had said, "I am a learner." "Those are often the same thing," Corvin had said. "The naturals who know they are learning are always the best ones. The ones who think they already know rarely improve." She had taken that and added it to the collection of things she was building, the understanding of how this place worked, and the people in it, and the way she fit inside it without losing the thing she was. She had not lost the thing she was. This had been her fear, underneath all the other fears, that the court would require a version of her that wasn't quite her, that the management of it would require the same reduction she had applied to herself for 4 years in a different direction, that she would arrive here and become careful again, in the specific way of someone making themselves fit. She had not. She had brought the herb tin and the river mint cutting, and the note on the window latch. She had written to old Bren about the proper season for harvesting the Channel Bank plants, and received a response that included 2 paragraphs of opinion about the quality of capital-grown herbs that she had read twice, because it was very much like him. She had written to Nell, and to Petra, and to her mother, and her mother had written back in the practical, contained way she wrote things, with the accounts of the estate included, and a single line at the end that said, "I can see from your letters that you are well," which from her mother was the equivalent of several paragraphs. She was well. She was, in fact, substantially better than well, which was a thing she was still getting used to. The morning of the winter ceremony was clear and cold, the kind of cold that had texture to it. You could feel it as a thing rather than just an absence of warmth. She dressed early and went to the North Tower before the palace woke, and stood at the central window and looked at the mountains, which were white now, above the blue line of their lower slopes. Calum found her there. He always found her there when she went before the day started, which had turned into something that happened without arrangement. She went, and after a while he appeared, and they stood at the windows together and looked at whatever was visible. "The ceremony is at midday," he said. "I know. Are you ready?" She looked at the mountains. The winter ceremony was the first full formal occasion of her new life, not the introduction, which had been about being seen, but the ceremony itself, which was about participation. She was going to be in the great hall, properly, as herself, doing the thing that was hers to do. "I am," she said. He stood beside her. They looked at the mountains in the white cold morning. "I want to go back to the estate in the spring," she said. "For a visit. See the channel path when the marsh route is coming back." "I will arrange it," he said. "I want to see old Bren and Nell and Petra, of course. And I want to walk the whole channel path to the cairn and sit beside it for a while." "We can do that," he said. She looked at the mountains. She thought about spring, and the channel bank, and the river, and she thought about this room, and this morning, and the person beside her, and she thought about all the versions of herself between here and there, the girl in the yellow dress, the woman in the sickbed, the person in the lamplight saying the true thing, and she held them all together, without letting any of them go. They were all hers. They were all true. They had all brought her here, which was a fact she could examine now without the old pain of it, not because the pain had not been real, but because she was on the other side of it, standing in a North Tower, in a city she was learning, beside a man she had chosen as much as he had found her. "I told Petra about the tincture," she said, "in my last letter." Calum looked at her. She wrote back and said, and I am quoting directly, "Obviously you did. I knew something was wrong with that fever. Tell the king he has good instincts." The sound he made was unmistakable this time. A real laugh, low and complete. She had heard it before, in the library, once, when she had said something dry, and he had been genuinely caught off guard by it. She had catalogued it then as the thing to work toward, and had since produced it twice more, which she was quietly proud of. "She wants to visit," Leora said. "She should come," he said. "She will ask Cole too many questions." "Cole will be delighted," he said. She looked at the mountains. The day was beginning outside the windows, the light changing, the city starting its noise, the morning shifting into itself. Below them, the palace grounds were beginning to show movement, the first signs of the day's preparations, and somewhere down there, the river garden was in its quiet state, the moss and the surviving plants, and the new bench she had finally ordered, which had arrived last week and was more comfortable than the original had probably ever been. She thought about the ceremony at midday, and what it meant, and what she would do there. She thought about a hall full of people, and the specific quality of being seen, and the fact that she was not afraid of it. She thought about how she had not been afraid for a long time now. Not the absence of awareness, she was very aware, of the court and its complexity, of the ongoing work of being in this position, of the things that were still learning, and the things that were still difficult. But aware was different from afraid. Aware was useful. Afraid was the thing that made her brew tinctures at midnight and hide in rooms and tell herself she was comfortable in the small space she had made. She was not in a small space. She was here, in a north tower with 9 windows, standing at full size. The person beside her was real and present, and not asking her to be anything other than what she was. The life ahead was complicated and interesting and large. She was ready for large. The ceremony, she said. Yes, he said. Let's go, she said. She turned from the window and walked to the door, and he came with her, and they went down the tower stairs and through the palace morning and into the day that was beginning around them, and she walked into it, without breaking stride, without the old sideways step of a person who had spent years moving through spaces at an angle to avoid being directly visible. Straight in, eyes open, full size. The ceremony was waiting. The hall was waiting. The court was waiting. She was ready for all of it. She had been ready, she thought, in the truest sense of it, the ready that was not the absence of fear, but the presence of decision. Since the morning she had stood in a herb garden beside a dry irrigation channel and told a man she had known for less than 2 weeks that she was done being small. She held that. She carried it forward. The winter morning moved around her as she walked, cold and clear and entirely real, and somewhere behind her the North Tower stood, with its 9 windows looking out at the mountains and the river, and the long, ordinary, extraordinary road ahead. She did not look back. She was going forward. The ceremony began at exactly midday, which was a thing the palace managed through a system Leora had not yet fully mapped but had come to trust. The great hall filled from the inside out, the council and senior lords first, then the junior lords and their families, then the diplomatic representatives and the court's outer circle, and finally the gallery, which was open to the wider population of the capital's official class, which turned out to include more people than she had initially understood. She stood to the left of the formal dais, with Lady Corvin, as the hall filled, watching. She had decided, 3 days earlier, how she was going to be in this room. She had decided it the way she made most important decisions now, not through planning and management, but through the honest application of who she actually was. She was going to be present. She was going to be warm, where warm was genuine, and precise, where precise was necessary, and most importantly, she was going to see the people in the room as people, not as obstacles or audiences or assessments to be passed. That was all. Corvan stood beside her with the particular stillness of someone who had done this many times and knew the value of the minutes before a ceremony began. She said, very quietly, "You are composed." "I am interested," Leora said. "That tends to look like composure." Corvin smiled. "It also tends to be better," she said. The hall completed its filling. The doors at the far end were drawn shut with the specific, finalized sound of a large space declaring itself ready for what came next. The winter ceremony was, in structure, an acknowledgement of the years passing and the years coming, a formal recognition of the cycle that the old woven packs had observed long before there were kings or courts or great halls to hold ceremonies in. It had accumulated formality over the generations, the way ceremonies did. But underneath the formal weight of it, she could feel the original purpose, the acknowledgement that time moved, that seasons changed, that what had been was not what would be, and that this was the right order of things. She stood in the winter ceremony and thought about the year that was closing. She thought about the morning she had woken up before selection day, with the clay cup in her hands. She thought about the fever she had arranged, and the lie she had maintained, and the man who had come to her room and said 3 words and changed the direction of everything. She thought about the channel path and the library, and the 20 minutes of honest telling, and the morning in a kitchen garden that she had not planned for, and which had turned out to be the morning she told herself the most important thing. She thought about all the mornings after. The ceremony moved through its stages, readings and acknowledgments, the formal recognition of the year's significant events, the winter offering that the head of council made on behalf of the court. Her part was not large, and she had been clear-eyed with herself about what her part needed to be. Genuine, visible, her own. Not the managed version of herself, and not the reduced version, and not anything other than what she was. She did her part. When the moment came, when Bain turned to the dais, and the hall's attention shifted, and the thing she had been present for and had built toward arrived, she was there, fully, in all the ways she now understood that to mean. The hall received it. Not with the uniform response she would not have believed, not 40 rows of identical feeling arranged by occasion. With the real response, the one made of individuals, some warmth and some reserve and some calibration still in progress, and one elderly lord in the 4th row who appeared to be genuinely moved. And Cole visible in the gallery looking pleased with himself, and Lady Hester Wynne in the west section, standing straight and present with the expression of a woman who was practicing something, and Lady Corvin very still in her own way, and Lord Ferris managing his expression, with visible effort, in a direction that was slightly more open than the one he had started with. The ceremony closed. The hall released itself into the reception that followed, the ceremony dissolving into human conversation, the way formal things did, becoming smaller and more real, as the people in it became people again, rather than a gathered effect. She moved through it. She was there for 2 hours. She talked to the elderly lord who had been moved and discovered he was the eldest member of the council's outer advisory and had been at the court for 50 years and had an extraordinary memory for the history of the king's line, which she asked him about with genuine interest and was rewarded with 40 minutes of specific and fascinating information. She talked to 2 of the diplomatic representatives from the Eastern Territories who had questions about the Western Territories that she could actually answer, and she answered them accurately, and with the understanding that a useful answer was worth more than a polite deflection. She talked to Cole, briefly, who reported that the gathering was going well by his assessment, which she had come to trust as reliable. She talked to Lady Hester. It was brief and in passing, and not particularly significant in its content, but it was real. A few sentences about the ceremony, a moment of genuine eye contact, the small ordinary transaction of 2 people acknowledging each other as people in a room. Hester's expression was not entirely easy. It was also not what it had been at the beginning. There was something working in it, something that was not done yet, but was in progress. Progress was enough. Near the end of the reception, she stood at the window at the far end of the hall. Her window, the one she had found instinctively, it turned out, every time she was in this room, and looked out at the afternoon capital. The cold was visible in the air above the rooftops, the particular shimmer of extreme cold in sunlight, and the sky above it was the specific pale winter blue that she had been learning to love. Calum came to stand beside her. They had been at different sides of the room for most of the reception, which was correct and right, and the way it was supposed to work. 2 people who were part of the same thing, and who were also individually capable of being in a room and doing the work of being there. She had not needed him beside her. She had not looked for him, except in the unconscious way she always knew where he was, the north finding. He was here now. "How are you?" he said. "Good," she said. "Actually good." He looked at her with the expression she knew completely, all of its components familiar now, catalogued and mapped and understood. It was the expression he had for her specifically, she had decided. She had watched his face in enough other situations to know that while he brought the same fundamental quality of attention to everything, this particular arrangement of it was hers. "I know," he said. "Stop that," she said. "I will try," he said, and made no evident attempt to. She looked out at the winter afternoon, and thought about the spring visit to the estate she had told him she wanted, and about the channel path and the marsh route coming back up in the thaw, and the sound of the kern in the early morning. She thought about old Bren saying the slow ones are the real ones, 31 years. She thought about the women who would stand in the next selection for other bonds, other recognitions, other 3-week reformations of everything they had believed about themselves. She hoped, in the specific and genuine way she had been learning to hope things since she stopped being afraid of hoping, that it went well for them, that whatever rooms they stood in them at full size. She thought about a clay cup and marsh root and the worst possible choice that had turned out to contain the beginning of the right ones. She thought about closed doors and the people who knocked on them. "Caleb," she said. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," she said, "for knocking." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for opening it." The afternoon was bright through the tall windows, and the city was outside it, and the river was somewhere beyond the city, making its way to wherever rivers went, and the hall behind them was full of people and conversation and the ongoing ordinary life of a court that was also, slowly and genuinely, beginning to be hers. She breathed it in. She had chosen this. She was here. She was glad.